There is a very specific kind of silence that falls over a crowded ballroom when a man introduces his mistress as his wife. It is not a sudden hush. It is a rapid, suffocating vacuum. My husband Nathan stood under the crystal chandelier of his corporate gala with his arm draped around a junior coordinator named Alyssa Pierce. He wore the bespoke tuxedo I paid for. She wore a confident, practiced smile. "This is Alyssa." His voice carried over the soft jazz playing in the corner. The woman behind the man. My real wife. I stood 20 feet away, framed by the grand mahogany double doors. The regional directors stared at him, then shifted their terrified gazes to me. The temperature in the room plummeted. I did not blink. I did not speak. I merely watched his delusion reach its peak. Before Nathan could take another sip of his champagne, Victor Thorne, the CEO of the logistics firm, descended the grand staircase. Victor walked right past Nathan, ignoring his outstretched hand. The CEO strode directly to me, took my hand, kissed my knuckles, and turned to the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor announced, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "I am so glad the true Mrs. Carter could make it. And more importantly, I would like to introduce our new majority debt holder and my new partner, Miss Serena Hughes." Nathan dropped his glass. It shattered against the marble. He thought he had spent the last 2 years successfully dismantling my life. He had no idea I had already bought his. If you have ever had to outsmart a partner who mistook your grief for weakness, let me know your age in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to Emily Told Stories. You will not want to miss how I built this trap. The collapse of a marriage does not happen under chandelier light. It happens in the quiet, unseen margins. 3 weeks earlier, the South Carolina heat hung over the coastal marshlands like a wet blanket. It was a Tuesday evening, and I sat on the wraparound porch of my family historic Battery home in Charleston. The air smelled of pluff mud and impending rain. Charleston is a city built on secrets. Behind the wrought iron gates and manicured azalea bushes, old money hides its sins with practiced elegance. I grew up learning how to read the silence between conversations. My father taught me that true wealth is not loud, it is observant. My name is Serena Hughes. I am 36 years old, and for the past 2 years my life had been an endless loop of probate courts, tax attorneys, and asset valuations. When my father passed, he left behind a sprawling, multi-tiered estate. Sorting through his legacy meant dealing with decades of trusts, land deeds, and silent partners. It was a full-time job on top of my actual career. As a wealth management consultant, the burden of untangling those syndicates fell squarely on my shoulders. I spent my days analyzing corporate debt and shielding generational wealth. In my grief and exhaustion, I made a calculated delegation. I handed Nathan the keys to our domestic accounts. I managed the millions. I let my husband pay the water bill and balance the joint checking. Nathan had stepped in, offering to handle our day-to-day finances so I could mourn and work in peace. I thought he was carrying my burden. I did not realize he was using my grief as a smokescreen. It felt like a partnership. It was actually a blind spot. The condensation slid down the side of my crystal glass. I picked it up, taking a slow sip. The sharp clinking of ice in my sweet tea was the only sound cutting through the thick coastal humidity. Then the screen of Nathan's iPad, abandoned carelessly on the wicker table beside me, glowed to life. A single notification chimed. I glanced down, expecting an alert from his logistics firm. Instead, a name materialized. Alyssa Pierce. She was a junior coordinator in his division. "The new linens for the guest room are perfect. Counting down until our weekend. Miss you." The glow of the screen illuminated the dark wicker of the table. The words burned themselves into my retinas. You do not buy guest room linens for a hotel. You buy them for a home. He was building a second life while I was burying my father. The iPad screen dimmed, fading back into a black mirror. I stared at my own reflection. I looked tired. The shadows under my eyes were a testament to the endless hours spent in conference rooms arguing with the state lawyers. Nathan had watched me exhaust myself. He had brewed my morning coffee, rubbed my shoulders, and told me to rest, all while siphoning our shared resources to feather a nest for his subordinate. My chest tightened. A cold knot formed beneath my ribs despite the sweltering evening. Another woman might have hurled the tablet against the brick driveway. Another woman might have called him screaming into the receiver. Instead, my professional training took the wheel. I evaluate risk for a living. I isolate inconsistencies, follow paper trails, and quantify liabilities. Emotion is a luxury you cannot afford when an audit begins. I set the sweet tea down. I picked up my phone and opened our joint banking application, a portal I had ignored for 18 months. I scrolled past the grocery runs and the utility payments, my eyes scanning the ledger with practiced precision. There it was, a glaring, ragged hole in the math. I navigated to the withdrawal history. The numbers marched down the screen in stark black and white. A series of routine outgoing transfers that did not align with our standard expenses. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. These were wire transfers, capital movement. Someone was making down payments. Someone was paying property taxes. My mind automatically began calculating the aggregate loss. It was not a rounding error. It was a hemorrhage. The crunch of tires on the oyster shell driveway broke the evening quiet. Nathan's sedan pulled into its designated spot. The engine cut off. I locked my phone. I slid the iPad exactly an inch to the left, precisely where he had left it. I took one deep breath, inhaling the salt air, and let the shock harden into resolve. I stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked toward the front door to greet my husband wearing a flawless, impenetrable smile. Dinner that night tasted like ash, but I chewed every bite. Every sip of wine felt heavy. Every bite of food required a conscious effort to swallow. I wanted to ask him what color the new guest room linens were. I wanted to ask him if Alyssa preferred the coast or the city. But I knew the rules of the game I was now playing. You do not interrogate a suspect when they hold the evidence. You gather the evidence while they are sleeping. Nathan sat across from me at the mahogany dining table, carving a piece of roasted chicken. He talked about his day with the smooth, practiced cadence of a man who believes he controls his environment. "The supply chain issues are clearing up," he said, pointing his fork toward me. "I think my partnership track is finally solidifying. Victor is giving me more regional oversight next quarter." "That is wonderful news," I said. My voice held steady. My hands rested calmly in my lap. He reached across the table and squeezed my fingers. His skin felt warm. Just hours ago, those same hands had likely been texting his junior coordinator about their upcoming weekend. The betrayal sat between us on the table like a physical object invisible to him, but suffocating to me. "I could not do it without your support, Serena," he said. "I know the estate has been draining you, but things are going to get easier for us soon. I promise." He looked right into my eyes. His gaze was warm and steady. It was the look of a man who had perfected his performance over years of rehearsal. I smiled back, noting the slight unevenness of his collar and the faint, lingering trace of something sweet and floral in the air around him. It was not my perfume. I noticed the way he checked his phone when he thought I was looking at my plate, the slight shift in his posture when a text came through, the subtle angling of the screen away from my line of sight. "I will drink to that," I said. I raised my wine glass, letting the crystal catch the dim light of the dining room. To things getting exactly what they deserve. He smiled, raising his own glass in return, oblivious to the fact that his audit had already begun. It began in the quiet isolation of 2 a.m. Sleep is a vulnerability when you are hunting, and I had no intention of closing my eyes. I sat at the antique mahogany desk in my home office. The only illumination came from the green glass of my banker lamp and the harsh blue glow of my laptop screen. I pushed the wooden sash window open a few inches to let the coastal night air circulate. The distinct, earthy smell of pluff mud and salt marsh drifted into the room. It is a scent native to the South Carolina Lowcountry. It serves as a reminder of the shifting tides and the deep, hidden ecosystems beneath the dark water. That night, the smell anchored me as the terrifying math of my marriage finally aligned on a glowing spreadsheet. For a decade, I have built my professional reputation managing the portfolios of Charleston's oldest families. My clients trust me because I see the narratives hidden inside numbers. Money leaves a fingerprint. It does not simply vanish. It shifts shape, moving through routing numbers, offshore accounts, and limited liability corporations. Nathan knew this. He had watched me dismantle fraudulent equity claims for my clients over evening cocktails. He just assumed I would never turn that forensic lens on my own home. That was his fatal miscalculation. I opened a fresh digital ledger. I began pulling 3 years of bank statements from our joint accounts. I bypassed the standard checking and went straight into the high-yield savings and the secondary investment funds. I cross-referenced every withdrawal against our known domestic expenses. A pattern emerged almost immediately. It was not a chaotic spending spree. It was a calculated, methodical extraction. Nathan had been filtering capital through a series of staggered wire transfers. He used a technique I often warned my corporate clients against called structuring. He broke large sums into smaller, less conspicuous amounts. $7,000 listed as a consulting fee, $12,000 disguised as an automotive logistics investment for his firm. He kept the transactions just under the threshold that would trigger a high security alert on my secondary banking application. Month by month, quarter by quarter, the ledger bled. I ran the aggregate total. $150,000. The number stared back at me stark and irrefutable. It was the exact amount required for a 20% down payment on a premium coastal property. I did not cry. My pulse remained steady, rhythmic, and cold. I traced the routing numbers. The capital had funneled into a domestic shell corporation named AP Coastal Holdings. AP. Alyssa Pierce. He was not very creative. I navigated to the Beaufort County Public Property Registry. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in the holding company name. The database churned for a fraction of a second before generating a deed transfer recorded 6 months prior. Property location: Hilton Head Island. It was a luxury beachfront condominium located in a highly sought-after oceanfront resort. I pulled up the architectural listing. Top floor unit overlooking the Calabogue Sound, featuring custom marble countertops and private beach access. The deed listed 2 names, Nathan Carter and Alyssa Pierce. They held it in joint tenancy with right of survivorship. He had purchased a second life using the financial foundation I had painstakingly secured. The audacity was staggering. He had stolen my father's legacy to buy a love nest for his subordinate. I hit the print command. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my study hummed to life. Page after page of undeniable evidence slid into the output tray. Bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, the county property deed, the real estate listing photos. I gathered the warm sheets of paper, feeling the weight of the truth in my hands. I slid them into a pristine manila folder. I was no longer a grieving daughter or a betrayed wife. I was an auditor, and my target had left a trail a mile wide. I locked the folder inside the bottom drawer of my desk, right beneath my client tax files. I worked through the night and into the following afternoon building a shadow archive. The sudden, heavy thud of the front door closing shattered the silence of the house. I glanced at the brass clock on my mantel. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Thursday. Nathan was not scheduled to be home for another 3 hours. Footsteps echoed down the hardwood hallway, moving steadily toward my study. The physical tension spiked. A sharp shot of adrenaline flooded my veins. I had less than 10 seconds. I minimized the banking portals. I closed the Beaufort County Registry. I pulled up a complex quarterly tax projection for a corporate client, filling my monitors with dense, innocuous tax code. I arranged my posture, leaning forward, resting my chin on my hand, projecting the image of a woman deep in professional thought. The study door swung open. Nathan stood in the doorway. He had loosened his silk tie and a suit jacket was slung casually over one shoulder. He looked handsome, successful, and entirely relaxed. There was a satisfaction in his posture that I recognized. It was the glow of a man who had just spent his afternoon indulging in something he believed he had gotten away with. "Hey," he said. His voice dropped into a soft, affectionate register. I managed to slip away from the office early. The automotive freight routes out of the Spartanburg plants are backed up for miles, and the supply chain meetings were a disaster. I just needed to come home to you. He crossed the room. I turned in my leather chair, offering him a warm, welcoming smile. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to my cheek. He lingered there for a second, sighing, as if the weight of the world was lifting from his shoulders. As he pulled back, the air shifted. I caught the distinct scent clinging to his collar. It was a boutique perfume, notes of bergamot, jasmine, and something sharp like crushed pink peppercorn. It was expensive, bright, and undeniably youthful. I wear a classic, heavy sandalwood fragrance. The contrast was as loud as a siren. He had not been dealing with freight routes or supply chain disasters. He had been at the condo in Hilton Head, or perhaps in a hotel room closer to the city, tangled in the new guest linens Alyssa had been so excited about. He smiled down at me, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You work too hard, Serena," he murmured, glancing at the tax spreadsheets on my screen. "You need to take a break. Let me take you out to dinner tonight, just the two of us. We can go to that French place on King Street you love." I looked up into the eyes of the man I had married. I saw the practiced empathy, the feigned concern, the seamless execution of a lie. He was offering to buy me dinner, using an account he had already hollowed out. He was comforting me while wearing the scent of the woman he had bought a house with. I held my breath, letting the venomous reality of the moment wash over me. I was not looking at a flawed husband who had made a mistake. I was looking at a calculated predator who viewed my trust as a resource to be mined. I smiled warmly, reaching up to adjust the lapel of his shirt, right where the perfume lingered the strongest. "Dinner sounds wonderful, Nathan," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and my tone light. "I would love nothing more." The drive from the coastal lowcountry up to the rolling hills of the Piedmont region took 3 silent hours. The landscape outside my tinted window slowly shifted from sprawling marshlands and ancient weeping willows to manicured equestrian estates and gated communities. I was attending the annual Magnolia Trust Charity Luncheon. It is an exclusive, highly anticipated gathering where South Carolina elites trade philanthropic checks for social currency. I was supposed to be sharing a table with my mother-in-law, Patricia Carter. Patricia is a woman constructed entirely of pastel cardigans and thinly veiled criticisms. She married into middle management decades ago, but always harbored intense high society aspirations. When Nathan introduced us years ago, Patricia saw my family pedigree as her personal stepping stone. She loved the prestige my maiden name offered her in local circles, but she deeply resented my financial independence. She preferred women who needed guidance, women who could be molded. I was already fully formed and independently wealthy, which made her endlessly uncomfortable. 2 days prior, Patricia had called me sounding incredibly weak and frail. She claimed a severe migraine had rendered her completely bedridden. She urged me to go to the charity event without her, begging me to represent the family well. I had offered to stay back and care for her, but she insisted I go. Her performance had been flawless. The country club ballroom was a vast sea of floral dresses and tailored seersucker suits. Waitstaff glided seamlessly through the room, carrying heavy silver trays of champagne and roasted pecan tartlets. The air hummed with the polite, overlapping chatter of wealthy patrons discussing real estate and summer vacation plans. I took my designated seat at a quiet table near the back of the hall, glad for the relative anonymity it provided. I sipped a glass of sparkling water, my mind still heavily compartmentalizing the brutal financial discoveries from the previous night. The stolen $150,000 still burned in the forefront of my thoughts. I casually scanned the room, adjusting to the blinding midday light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My gaze drifted naturally toward the elevated VIP section, reserved for platinum corporate donors. The breath stopped dead in my throat. Seated at a prime table, directly in the brilliant sunlight, was Patricia. She was not bedridden. She did not have a migraine. She looked radiant, wearing a crisp, tailored linen suit and holding a crystal flute of mimosa. My analytical mind immediately began calculating the variables. Why lie about a headache just to attend the exact same luncheon under a different ticket? The answer materialized a second later, when the young woman sitting next to Patricia leaned over to share a joke. It was Alyssa Pierce. I sat perfectly still, enveloped by the ambient noise of the crowded ballroom. The clinking of fine silverware and the soft, classical music faded into static. I watched them interact. This was not a chance encounter or a polite professional meeting between a man-mother and his junior corporate coordinator. Their body language was deeply intimate and entirely relaxed. Patricia reached out and patted Alyssa's arm with genuine affection. They leaned their heads together, laughing warmly at something displayed on Alyssa's phone screen. They were sharing a dessert plate, their forks clinking together in easy familiarity. Patricia was treating this girl with the maternal warmth and open acceptance she had historically withheld from me. Then the sunlight angled sharply through the glass, hitting Alyssa's designer coat draped casually over the back of her chair. A sharp, metallic flash caught my eye. Pinned to the lapel of that coat was a piece of jewelry that made the blood freeze solid in my veins. It was a vintage pearl and antique gold brooch. I did not just recognize it. I owned it. It was a priceless family heirloom passed down directly from my great-grandmother. I thought I had lost it at a gallery opening 6 months prior. I had spent weeks agonizing over its disappearance, tearing my dressing room apart and carrying an immense, heavy guilt for losing a piece of my family history. This was no ordinary department store accessory. The gold setting was crafted in a distinct twisted vine pattern typical of late 19th century Charleston artisans. But the most damning detail was invisible to the naked eye. Tucked beneath the locking pin, engraved deeply into the antique gold, were the initials S.E.H. Serena Evelyn Hughes. My great-grandmother name. My exact name. Nathan had not just bought his mistress a beachfront condominium with my money. He had scavenged through my private jewelry box to gift her a piece of my heritage. And Patricia knew. The realization slammed into me with the crushing force of a physical blow. Patricia had to know the origin of that specific brooch. She had complimented it on my lapel dozens of times over the past decade. Sitting there, watching them laugh, the true dimensions of the betrayal expanded exponentially. This was not a solitary affair orchestrated by a wandering husband. This was a synchronized family conspiracy. Patricia was actively facilitating her son's secret life. She was grooming his mistress to step into my shoes while happily watching Nathan drain my inherited wealth. I did not march across the ballroom. I did not cause a dramatic scene or confront the thieves wearing my legacy. A public confrontation would only give them the opportunity to destroy evidence, prepare their lies, and deny everything. Instead, I reached slowly into my leather clutch. I pulled out my phone and activated the camera. I zoomed in on the VIP table, framing Patricia and Alyssa perfectly against the bright window. I took 3 rapid, high-resolution photographs. In the final shot, Alyssa turned slightly and the pearl brooch was captured with absolute crystal clarity. Almost as if sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure, my phone vibrated in my palm. A text message appeared on the locked screen. It was from Patricia. "I hope the luncheon is beautiful, Serena. I am so sorry I could not be there. My head is throbbing and I have not left the bed. Have a glass of champagne for me." I stared at the glowing text. I looked up and watched Patricia take a generous sip of her mimosa, her face animated with joy as Alyssa told another amusing story. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They relied heavily on my assumed naivety. They thought my immense grief over losing my father had rendered me completely blind and hopelessly gullible. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white, but my breathing remained slow and controlled. My fingers tapped against the glass screen, composing a reply with deliberate, measured strokes. "The event is lovely, Patricia. Please do not worry about me at all. Focus on resting. I am bringing you some special tea to help with your migraine. I want you to feel exactly like yourself again." I hit send. Across the expansive room, I watched Patricia's phone light up on the white linen tablecloth. She glanced at the notification, smiled at my sweet, gullible response, and showed the screen directly to Alyssa. They both chuckled, sharing a private joke at my expense. They thought they were laughing at a fool. They had no idea they were smiling directly for a forensic auditor who had just documented their complicity. The rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. Nathan was a thief, but his mother was a willing accomplice. They had invited an intruder into my family history and decorated her with my stolen heirlooms. I placed my phone back into my purse and took a final sip of my sparkling water. The flavor was bitter and grounding. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and quietly exited the ballroom before the main course was even served. I needed to get back to Charleston immediately. If Nathan was bold enough to steal a recognizable family heirloom right out of my bedroom, I needed to know exactly what else he was actively trying to rewrite. The missing coastal funds and the stolen brooch were only the visible symptoms. The disease running through my marriage was much deeper, and I was about to discover just how aggressively my husband intended to erase my reality under my own roof. The morning sun filtered through the wooden plantation shutters of our Charleston kitchen, casting long, striped shadows across the white marble island. I stood barefoot on the cold floor holding a heavy silver carafe. The rich, dark scent of French roast coffee filled the room. Nathan sat on the velvet bar stool across from me, wearing a crisp, tailored dress shirt and checking his email on his phone. I tipped the carafe forward. A steaming stream of dark liquid cascaded into his porcelain mug. My hand did not shake. The stream remained perfectly unbroken and precise. I watched the dark liquid rise to the exact brim, knowing the man sitting 3 feet away was actively trying to rewrite my reality. The physical discipline required to pour that coffee without pouring it over his lap was profound. Nathan looked up from his screen and offered a warm, practiced smile. "Thank you, sweetheart. You are up early today." I set the silver carafe down, resting my hands flat against the cool marble countertop. "I have a major compliance review coming up at the firm," I replied, keeping my tone light and conversational. "It is a standard internal audit, but they are requiring all senior consultants to submit updated disclosures for any joint domestic accounts. I was glancing over our ledger last night to prepare the paperwork." Nathan paused. His coffee mug hovered an inch from his lips. The subtle shift in his posture was instantaneous. His shoulders stiffened and the warm smile vanished, replaced by a careful, calculated mask. I tilted my head, projecting innocent confusion. I noticed a series of large wire transfers over the past 2 quarters, roughly $150,000 in total. "Do you know where those funds were routed?" He set the mug down. A thick silence stretched across the kitchen island. I watched his mind process the threat, calculate the angles, and select his defensive strategy. He did not panic. Instead, he chose cruelty. "Serena," he murmured, his voice dropping into a patronizing, soothing octave. "We talked about this months ago." I blinked, feigning genuine surprise. "We did." He stood up, rounding the kitchen island to stand beside me. He placed a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder. "Honey, you have been under an unimaginable amount of stress since your father passed away. The estate probate, the lawyers, the endless paperwork. It has taken a toll on you. We moved those funds into a diversified trust to shield them from the upcoming capital gains adjustments. You signed off on it during the fall." I stared at him, letting his lie hang in the air. He was attempting to erase my financial literacy. He was taking the $150,000 he stole to buy Alyssa a coastal condominium and wrapping it in a fictional tax strategy. "I do not remember signing any authorization for a diversified trust," I said, letting a deliberate note of vulnerability slip into my voice. Nathan sighed, a soft theater of exhausted patience. His hand rubbed my back in slow circles. "I know, sweetheart. Your memory has been slipping lately. It is the trauma. Your father went through something very similar at the end, remember? The cognitive fog, the confusion. It is hereditary, and the grief is just accelerating it. We need to get you an appointment with a specialist. I am worried about you." He used my late father's battle with dementia as a weapon to cover his theft. The sheer depravity of that maneuver hit me like a physical strike to the chest. He was gaslighting me, orchestrating a narrative where I was losing my mind so he could safely loot my inheritance. The air in the kitchen grew stifling. For a fraction of a second, my composed facade threatened to crack. The urge to scream, to throw the silver carafe, to tear the expensive tailored shirt from his chest was overpowering. Then a memory surfaced, anchoring me to the marble floor. I was 10 years old, sitting on the wraparound porch of the Battery estate. The evening air smelled of sweet pipe tobacco and rain. My father sat across from me, tapping a wooden chess piece against the board. I was losing the game, badly. My king was cornered, and I was crying out of sheer frustration. "Tears will not change the board, Serena," my father had said, his voice rich and steady. "Look at the pieces. Stop reacting to his threats and start building your own. Sometimes you have to sacrifice your most valuable pawn to make the enemy believe he is winning. You let him take the piece. You let him feel superior. And while he is celebrating, you take his king." The memory faded, leaving behind a crystalline focus. Nathan wanted me to be weak. He needed me to be a fragile, grieving daughter losing her grip on reality. If I fought him now, if I presented my evidence, he would realize I was lucid. He would hide the money, destroy the documents, and warn his mother. I had to sacrifice my pride to secure my victory. I lowered my gaze, staring at the floor tiles. I let my shoulders slump, breaking my perfect posture. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic. "You really think I am forgetting things?" I whispered, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound terrified. Nathan pulled me into a tight embrace. His chin rested on the top of my head. I could smell the faint trace of Alyssa Boutique perfume lingering from the previous afternoon. "It is okay, Serena," he hushed. "I am here. I am taking care of everything. You do not need to worry about the firm or the audits or the accounts. Just focus on resting. I will handle the financial disclosures for you. I will make sure everything is perfect." I buried my face in his chest, hiding the cold, calculating expression that had overtaken my features. "I am so sorry, Nathan," I murmured, my voice muffled against his shirt. "I just feel so lost without him." "You are not lost," he replied, kissing the crown of my head. "You have me." He held me for another minute, solidifying his false victory. He felt powerful. He felt secure. He truly believed he had subdued the brilliant wealth manager, reducing her to a dependent, confused housewife. His ego swelled, filling the kitchen with an almost tangible arrogance. "I have to get to the office," he said, stepping back and adjusting his silk tie. "The supply chain logistics are a mess today. Will you be all right here by yourself?" I nodded, wiping a fake tear from the corner of my eye. "I think I will. Just lie down for a while." "Good girl," he said. He grabbed his leather briefcase and walked out the front door. The heavy oak slammed shut, followed by the distant sound of his sedan starting and crunching down the oyster shell driveway. The moment the engine noise faded down the street, my trembling ceased. My shoulders snapped back into their rigid, perfect alignment. The fragile, confused housewife vanished entirely, leaving the auditor standing alone in the kitchen. I walked directly to my home office. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me and sat at the antique mahogany desk. Nathan had grown reckless. His successful gaslighting attempt would make him confident, and confident men leave digital fingerprints. I needed to know exactly how deep his financial sabotage went before I executed my trap. I opened my encrypted laptop. I bypassed the standard domestic banking applications and logged directly into the elite corporate portal of my wealth management firm. This secure network tracked the high-level institutional assets and the overarching family trust infrastructure. It was an interface Nathan did not possess the clearance to view. The dashboard loaded, displaying the complex web of real estate holdings, mutual funds, and venture capital investments. I initiated a comprehensive diagnostic sweep, searching for any unauthorized external queries linked to my credentials. A red flag notification instantly illuminated the upper right corner of the screen. My pulse narrowed. The notification was not a simple domestic transfer or a suspicious retail purchase. It was an automated alert generated by the Federal Underwriting Division of our partner bank. I clicked the alert. The digital document expanded, filling my monitor with dense legal text. It was a finalized approval form for a revolving corporate line of credit. The borrowing entity was AP Coastal Holdings, the shell company Nathan used to purchase Alyssa's condominium. I scanned down to the principal amount. $2 million. A cold sweat broke across the back of my neck. Nathan had not just stolen $150,000 from our checking account. He had secured a $2 million commercial loan. But a mid-level automotive logistics vice president does not have the collateral to secure that kind of federal capital on his own. I scrolled rapidly to the guarantor section at the bottom of the electronic contract. There, appended to the legal signature line, was the verified digital credential of my elite wealth management firm. Beside it was a notarized electronic signature. It was my signature. He had forged my name. He had leveraged my family ancestral estate and my professional corporate credentials to silently back a $2 million loan for his mistress shell company. The infidelity was a betrayal of the heart. The gaslighting was a psychological assault. But this document was federal corporate fraud. The game had just escalated from a quiet divorce into a high-stakes legal war, and I was holding the match. My hand hovered over the wireless mouse. A slight, angry tremor vibrated through my fingertips. It was the physical manifestation of raw, unadulterated fury. For a woman who prided herself on flawless control, that tiny shake felt like a seismic event. I closed my eyes and drew a slow, deep breath, pulling the chilled, conditioned air of the study directly into my lungs. I focused on the sound of the ticking brass clock on my mantel. When I opened my eyes, the tremor was gone. The cold composure of a seasoned financial strategist returned, settling over my shoulders like a tailored suit. I leaned closer to the glowing monitor, examining the details of the digital contract. Nathan Carter was a mid-level executive pulling a comfortable salary, but he lacked the liquid assets to secure a vast commercial loan. A traditional bank would require extensive physical documentation, dual counsel review, and a grueling underwriting process to mortgage my historic Charleston estate. Nathan knew he could not bypass those rigid domestic protocols, so he pivoted. He exploited my professional world instead of my personal one. He used my elite wealth management firm as a silent guarantor, backing his shell corporation, AP Coastal Holdings. But even a shadow guarantee required a notarized signature to clear the federal compliance hurdles. I zoomed in on the digital stamp anchoring the bottom of the contract. The notary seal belonged to a junior compliance officer employed directly by his own logistics company. He had bought off a subordinate. He found someone desperate or greedy enough to rubber stamp a fraudulent federal document without asking uncomfortable questions. The motive was staring me right in the face. The capital was explicitly earmarked for a corporate equity buy-in. He was purchasing a lucrative partnership stake in Victor Thorne and his logistics empire. Nathan planned to ascend to the executive board using my forged signature as his golden ticket. He intended to secure his fortune and then, presumably, discard the grieving wife he had successfully robbed. This was no longer a simple domestic dispute. It was a federal crime. I reached for my phone and dialed a private number I kept secured for high-level corporate emergencies. I did not need a family law practitioner to handle a messy divorce. I needed a corporate bulldog. I needed Declan Cross. Declan was a former federal prosecutor who now operated a highly exclusive corporate litigation firm in downtown Charleston. He specialized in hostile takeovers, white-collar fraud, and silent financial executions. He answered on the second ring. His voice was sharp and entirely devoid of pleasantries. "I need an emergency consultation, Declan," I said, keeping my tone flat and even. "I have uncovered a fraudulent $2 million commercial loan utilizing my firm credentials as the primary guarantor. The borrowing entity is a shell corporation controlled by my husband." A heavy silence hung on the line for a fraction of a second. Declan processed the scale of the statement with the speed of a veteran predator. "Bring the digital files to my office in 20 minutes, he replied. "Do not use your primary vehicle. Take a cab." The interior of his downtown office was a masterpiece of intimidation. Dark walnut paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a sweeping view of the Charleston harbor. Declan sat behind his broad desk reviewing the printed documents I had provided. He was a man in his late 50s with sharp, observant eyes and a demeanor that radiated quiet menace. He did not offer empty sympathy or pointless apologies. He simply treated the betrayal as a fascinating tactical problem. "This is incredibly brazen," Declan murmured, tracing the printed notary seal with the tip of his silver pen. "Your husband bypassed the retail banking sector entirely to avoid alerting you. He utilized a subordinate to forge the authorization. He is leveraging your professional reputation to buy his way into a senior partnership." "Exactly," I replied, sitting rigidly in the leather guest chair. "I want to freeze the transaction today. I want the notary investigated, and I want Nathan removed from the joint accounts." Declan leaned back, steepling his fingers together. His gaze locked onto mine. "No," he said, his voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "We do not stop the transaction, Serena. We let him finish it." I frowned, my analytical mind struggling to grasp the logic of allowing a fraud to proceed. "Explain that," I demanded. "If we flag the forgery today, the bank halts the capital transfer," Declan explained. "Nathan claims ignorance, blames the corrupt notary, and scrambles to cover his tracks. You might get a divorce, but he walks away with his career intact. However, if we wait until the capital clears and he officially purchases the equity stake, the dynamic shifts entirely. He binds himself to the logistics firm using stolen money. The partnership shares become the physical asset acquired through fraud. Once the ink dries on his promotion, we strike. We do not just file for divorce. We seize his new executive equity. We trap his entire future in the legal crosshairs, making you the primary creditor of his corporate standing." The sheer brilliance of the strategy washed over me. Declan was not suggesting we mitigate the damage. He was suggesting we let Nathan build his entire empire on a rigged foundation before pulling the floorboards out from under him. I would not just dismantle his personal life. I would own his professional existence. "How long do we wait?" I asked, feeling a dangerous new energy surging through my veins. "The equity transfer is scheduled to finalize in 10 days, right before his annual company gala," Declan replied, tapping the calendar on his desk. "You have to maintain ordinary domestic routines until then. You cannot let him sense even a hint of suspicion. He needs to feel victorious." "I can play the part," I assured him. I stood up, gathering my coat. Declan escorted me to the heavy oak door. "Be careful, Serena," he warned, his tone carrying a rare note of genuine caution. Men who believe they have successfully stolen a fortune often become highly unpredictable when they feel secure. I stepped out into the humid coastal air, my mind operating at a terrifying new velocity. The ride back to the Battery estate felt strangely triumphant. I was no longer a victim reacting to a betrayal. I was the architect of a spectacular demolition. When I walked back through my front door, the house was quiet. Nathan was still at his office, finalizing the details of his grand illusion. I went to my dressing room and changed out of my tailored suit, replacing it with a soft cashmere sweater. I needed to look like the fragile, grieving wife he expected to find. As I brushed my hair, my phone chimed from the vanity table. I picked it up, expecting another patronizing text from my spouse. Instead, the screen displayed an incoming email from the Coastal Country Club Executive Board. It was an exclusive invitation to their upcoming Women in Logistics networking mixer. I scrolled through the guest list provided in the digital attachment. Right near the top, listed as a featured speaker under the logistics firm banner, was Alyssa Pierce. She was not just hiding in the shadows anymore. She was stepping into the high society circles my family had helped establish. She was boldly claiming space in my world, flaunting the stolen resources funded by my signature. A cold, genuine smile touched my lips. I tapped the screen and officially confirmed my attendance. The corporate chess match was locked in place, and it was time to finally meet my opponent face to face on my own territory. The Atlantic breeze swept across the emerald green lawns of the Kiowa Island Country Club, carrying the faint scent of salt and expensive sunscreen. The Women in Logistics mixer was in full swing on the terrace. Waiters in crisp white jackets wove through groups of female executives carrying trays of crafted beverages and artisanal hors d'oeuvres. I stood near the carved stone balustrade holding a glass of iced lemon water. My tailored navy sheath dress acted as a silent armor against the humid afternoon heat. I have been a member of this club since childhood. My father taught me how to swing a golf club on the 18th hole, right over there. Today, I was not here for leisure. I was hunting. Through the crowd of sleek corporate attire and polite professional chatter, a figure moved with an unearned familiarity. Alyssa Pierce. She looked younger in person than she did in digital photographs. Her blonde hair was styled in loose beach waves, and she wore a tailored ivory blazer that draped effortlessly over her shoulders. She carried herself with the reckless buoyancy of a woman who believed she had just won a lottery she never actually entered. I watched her navigate the terrace. She did not shy away from the senior executives. She sought them out, introducing herself with a bright, polished enthusiasm. Then her gaze tracked across the stone patio and locked onto mine. A normal subordinate engaged in an illicit affair with her superior would freeze. She would turn away, hide behind a floral arrangement, or flee the venue entirely. Alyssa did none of those things. Instead, her chin lifted. A slow, venomous smile spread across her face. She adjusted her grip on her drink and walked directly toward me. "Miss Hughes," she said, her voice pitched perfectly to sound respectful to any casual observer. "I am Alyssa Pierce. I work closely with your husband at the firm. I am so glad to finally meet you in person." I looked at the hand she extended. Her fingernails were painted a pristine coral pink. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds before I reached out and gave her a brief, clinical handshake. "Alyssa," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Nathan has mentioned your name. He says you have been a great help with his recent transition." Her smile widened, showing a row of impossibly white teeth. "Oh, Nathan is wonderful to work with. He is so generous with his time and his resources. He really takes care of his team." She raised her drink to take a sip. It was a custom coastal cocktail, a vibrant pink concoction garnished with a slice of dehydrated grapefruit. A single heavy bead of condensation gathered near the rim, sliding slowly down the frosted glass before dripping onto the pristine stone patio. My eyes followed the drop of water, then traveled back up to her ivory blazer. Pinned securely to her left lapel, catching the late afternoon sunlight, was the vintage beryl brooch. The twisted gold setting gleamed against the pale fabric. She wore my great-grandmother legacy like a cheap department store accessory. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was testing the waters, measuring my perception, banking on the assumption that the grieving, exhausted wife was too passive to notice or too polite to cause a scene. "It is a lovely event," Alyssa continued, gesturing toward the ocean view. "I am actually looking at properties down the coast myself. Nathan has been advising me on real estate investments. He has such a brilliant mind for acquiring valuable assets." I shifted my weight slightly, sliding my right hand into the hidden pocket of my navy dress. My thumb located the side button on my phone and pressed twice, initiating the voice recorder. The device vibrated softly against my hip, confirming it was capturing every word. "Real estate is a sound investment," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed southern charm. "The coastal market is booming right now. Have you found a location that suits your tastes?" She leaned in just a fraction, her posture conspiratorial. "I actually just closed on a beautiful condominium in Hilton Head, right on the water. It is a major step up for me, but Nathan assured me it was the right move. He said I deserve the upgrade. He is so supportive of my upcoming promotion. I tilted my head, projecting genuine interest. A promotion? I had not realized the firm was expanding the coordination department. Alyssa laughed, a light, airy sound that grated against the ocean breeze. Oh, it is not just the coordination department. Nathan is stepping into a senior partnership role soon. He told me he needs someone by his side who truly understands his vision, someone who can manage the social demands of a partner lifestyle. A real partner, you know? She let the word hang in the air. Partner. The subtext was blindingly transparent. She was not talking about a corporate promotion. She was talking about a marital one. She was standing on the terrace of my childhood country club drinking a cocktail and informing me that she intended to replace me. I admire your classic style, Serena, she added, seamlessly shifting her strategy to veiled insults. You always look so vintage. It is very traditional. Nathan prefers things a bit more modern, but I think preserving the past is sweet. She reached up and lightly touched the pearl brooch on her lapel, drawing undeniable attention to the stolen gold. I love incorporating vintage pieces into a fresh look, she murmured. It gives old things a new purpose. Do you not agree? The restraint required to stand there and not physically rip the heirloom from her chest took every ounce of discipline my father had ever instilled in me. I did not flinch. I did not let my gaze drop. I looked directly into her eyes, letting the silence build until her confident smile began to falter at the edges. I think I began my voice dropping into a register so cold it defied the summer heat, that people who wear things that do not belong to them eventually have to pay the true cost of the item. Alyssa blinked, a flash of uncertainty passing behind her eyes. Then she recovered, forcing a bright laugh. Well, I suppose quality always comes with a price. I pulled my hand from my pocket, leaving the phone safely tucked away. The recording was flawless. I had her boasting about the Hilton Head property, the upcoming promotion, and Nathan's financial generosity. She had just provided the exact audio evidence Declan Cross would need to obliterate any plausible deniability Nathan might try to claim in court. It was a pleasure meeting you, Alyssa, I said, offering her a final, terrifyingly polite smile. I have a feeling you are getting exactly what you deserve. Thank you, Serena, she replied, her confidence returning as she took my words as a genuine compliment. I really am. She turned and walked back toward the crowd of executives, her ivory blazer catching the wind. I stood by the balustrade watching her mingle. She felt victorious. She thought she had established dominance over the weak, oblivious wife. She did not realize she had just walked willingly into a financial guillotine and pulled the lever herself. I did not stay for the remainder of the mixer. I had the evidence I needed from the mistress. Now I needed the blueprint from the master. I walked briskly through the clubhouse and handed my valet ticket to the attendant. I checked my wristwatch. It was 4 o'clock. Nathan had a standing tea time at a different golf course across town every Thursday afternoon. He would not be home for at least another 3 hours. As the valet brought my car around, my phone buzzed with an automated security alert from my home network. The notification indicated that Nathan had accessed his mahogany study safe earlier that morning. A safe he insisted held only outdated life insurance policies and old passports. A safe he assumed I did not know the combination to. I slid into the leather driver's seat and started the engine. Alyssa had practically read from a script regarding his upcoming promotion and restructuring. If Nathan was preparing to transition his life, his documents would reflect the timeline. The gaslighting, the stolen funds, the forged corporate loan, and the arrogant mistress were all separate pieces of a singular puzzle. I needed to see the complete picture he was building. I put the car in gear and drove toward the Battery estate, ready to crack open the vault and read the ending he had planned for me. The drive from Kiowa Island back to downtown Charleston provided 45 minutes of uninterrupted silence. My mind categorized the audio recording of Alyssa Pierce sorting her arrogant admissions into actionable legal leverage. The afternoon sun baked the asphalt, radiating heat in visible waves. By the time I pulled my car onto the oyster shell driveway of the Battery estate, the property was quiet. The thick, humid air hung heavy over the manicured lawns. Nathan was allegedly on the back nine of a golf course across town. I knew he was likely nowhere near a putting green, but his scheduled absence granted me the necessary window to move freely inside my own home. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the cool, air-conditioned foyer. The house felt cavernous. The silence was not peaceful. It was expectant. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight down the eastern corridor toward Nathan's mahogany-paneled study. His workspace was meticulously curated to project an aura of established authority. Leather-bound books he never read lined the shelves. A heavy crystal decanter sat prominently on a side table. The aesthetic was a carefully constructed fiction, much like the man himself. I walked around the large executive desk and knelt on the Persian rug. Built into the lower cabinetry, concealed behind a false wooden panel, was a biometric and keypad wall safe. Nathan believed this vault was his impenetrable fortress. He assumed I possessed zero interest in his outdated life insurance policies and old passports. He underestimated my observational skills. Months ago, during a rare moment when he thought I was distracted by a phone call, I watched the reflection of his hand in the dark glass of the window pane. 6 keystrokes. 061419. June 14th, 2019. The exact date Alyssa Pierce was hired at his logistics firm. The cruelty of the combination did not sting. It merely confirmed the timeline. I pressed my fingers against the cool digital keypad. The rubber buttons yielded silently under my touch. 061419. A green light flared. The heavy internal locking mechanisms retracted with a satisfying mechanical thud. I pulled the steel door open, revealing the dark interior. There were no passports. There were no insurance policies. Instead, the safe contained a stack of pristine legal folders and a sleek presentation binder. I reached inside and withdrew the binder. My fingers traced the cover. It was crafted from glossy, heavy cardstock, the kind of premium material corporate marketing departments use for high-level investor pitches. The weight of the paper felt substantial, expensive, and deeply arrogant. I opened the cover. The title page featured a prominent graphic of the logistics firm logo alongside the words, Executive Leadership Restructuring Initiative. Below that heading was Nathan's name. I turned the page and stepped into the mind of a predator. The document was a comprehensive public relations strategy curated by a boutique crisis management firm based out of Atlanta. It detailed a step-by-step rollout for Nathan's ascension to senior partner. But the corporate roadmap was inextricably tied to his personal rebranding. Page 4 contained a section titled Social Optics and Partner Integration. I read the paragraphs twice to ensure my eyes were processing the text correctly. The strategy outlined a coordinated campaign to present Nathan as a dynamic, forward-thinking executive, unburdened by legacy ties. It explicitly listed the introduction of a, quote, modern supportive partner, unquote. A timeline was charted at the bottom of the page. The target date for this soft launch was exactly 10 days away. The night of the annual company gala. He planned to debut Alyssa at the most prestigious corporate event of the year. He intended to walk her into the grand ballroom and integrate her into his professional ecosystem while the ink on his promotion was still wet. I set the glossy binder onto the rug and reached back into the safe, retrieving the legal folders. The label on the first tab read, Dissolution. I flipped the folder open. Inside rested a drafted post dated Divorce Settlement, prepared by a ruthless family law attorney I recognized from local society circles. The terms laid out in the document were nothing short of extortion. Nathan was not asking for a fair division of assets. He was demanding a quiet, immediate surrender. The settlement included a specific leverage clause. The legal language detailed the $2 million commercial line of credit guaranteed by my wealth management firm. The snare was laid out with terrifying clarity. If I fought the divorce or attempted to claim alimony, he would default on the loan. The resulting fallout would trigger a federal audit of my firm. The scandal of a fraudulent guarantee bearing my digital signature would obliterate my professional reputation. My clients would flee. My legacy would crumble. He intended to blindside me with the paperwork on the morning after the gala. He would hand me the settlement, explain the trap, and force me to quietly sign over my liquid assets to protect my career. He believed the threat of public humiliation and professional ruin would render me compliant. He thought I would bow my head, accept the defeat, and fade quietly into the background while he stepped into high society with Alyssa on his arm. The sheer structural brilliance of his blackmail scheme was impressive. If I had remained the blind, grieving wife he assumed me to be, the plan would have worked flawlessly. I pulled my phone from my pocket and activated the camera. I did not rush. I methodically photographed every single page of the PR strategy. I captured the crisp typography of the divorce settlement. I focused the lens on the leverage clauses, ensuring the legal jargon was perfectly legible. The soft synthetic click of the digital shutter echoed in the silent study. Click, click, click. With every photograph, the balance of power shifted. Nathan blackmail hinged entirely on the element of surprise. He needed me to discover the forged corporate loan at the exact moment he presented the divorce papers. By uncovering the weapon early, I stripped the ammunition from his chamber. I possessed the audio of his mistress bragging about her stolen assets. I possessed the digital trail of the embezzled coastal funds. I possessed the evidence of his mother complicity. And now, I possessed the exact blueprint of his master plan. I knew the timeline. 10 days. I neatly restacked the papers, ensuring the edges were perfectly flush. I placed the post dated settlement back into the manila folder. I closed the glossy, heavy cardstock of the PR binder. I returned the items to the dark interior of the safe, arranging them in the exact order and position I had found them. I closed the heavy steel door. The locking mechanisms engaged with a final, definitive click. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy sheath dress. I walked around the mahogany desk, erasing any trace of my presence in the room. The counteroffensive was crystallizing in my mind. 10 days gave me the precise window required to bypass his localized threats and aim directly for the throat of his corporate empire. Before I could take another step toward the hallway, the sharp, piercing chime of the front doorbell shattered the quiet atmosphere of the estate. I froze. My mind instantly recalibrated the variables. Nathan was not due home. Delivery drivers typically left packages on the side veranda without ringing the primary bell. I walked swiftly down the corridor and approached the security console mounted on the foyer wall. The high-definition camera feed displayed the front porch. Standing on the brick welcome mat, shifting her weight nervously from foot to foot, was Kelly. Kelly was a long-time fixture in our social circle. We had served on several charity boards together over the years. She was also a frequent tennis partner of Patricia Carter. Her arrival was unannounced, unplanned, and highly irregular. I watched her adjust her designer handbag on the monitor. Her eyes darted toward the driveway, checking for my car. She was not here for a casual afternoon visit. She was a scout. Patricia had likely dispatched her to probe my emotional state following my sudden departure from the luncheon. They needed to know if I had spotted the pearl brooch. They needed to gauge my suspicion. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. If the enemy sends a spy into your camp, you do not lock the gates. You invite the spy inside and hand them a map drawn entirely of lies. I unlocked the heavy oak door and pulled it open, plastering a look of exhausted, pleasant surprise across my face. Let the games begin. Kelly stood on the brick welcome mat, holding a designer handbag like a shield. Her smile was bright, brittle, and entirely rehearsed. "Serena, darling," she chimed, her voice echoing slightly in the grand foyer. "I know it is terribly last minute, but I was just driving past the Battery and thought of you. You vanished so quickly from the charity luncheon today. I wanted to make sure you were holding up all right. Let me whisk you away for an early dinner. You look like you could use a proper meal and a strong cocktail." Kelly was a woman whose entire social standing relied on the currency of gossip. She traded secrets for invitations and loyalty for status. She possessed no independent wealth of her own, relying instead on a series of lucrative divorces to maintain her lifestyle. In the intricate hierarchy of Charleston society, she acted as a remora fish, attaching herself to larger predators to survive. Currently, her primary patron was Patricia Carter. Kelly played doubles tennis with my mother-in-law every Tuesday morning. Her sudden appearance on my doorstep was a calculated deployment. Patricia needed a reconnaissance mission, and Kelly was the eager volunteer. I stepped back, opening the heavy oak door wider. A look of fragile gratitude washed over my features. "That is so thoughtful of you, Kelly," I replied, letting my shoulders slump just a fraction. "I honestly could use a distraction right now. Let me just grab my purse." We took her luxury SUV, driving the short distance to an upscale seafood establishment situated on the edge of the historic harbor. The restaurant was a sanctuary of dim lighting, polished mahogany, and frigid air conditioning. The hostess guided us to a secluded booth near the back, surrounded by heavy velvet curtains that muffled the ambient noise of the dining room. The waiter arrived promptly, depositing a sprawling silver tier of raw oysters resting on a bed of crushed ice. We ordered dry martinis. The trap was set, and it was time to let the spy initiate her interrogation. Kelly wasted no time. She picked up a small silver fork and pierced a delicate oyster. "Patricia mentioned you seemed rather distant lately," she began, her tone dripping with feigned sympathy. "She was so worried when you left the country club early today. Is everything all right at home, Serena? You and Nathan are not hitting a rough patch, are you?" The sharp clinking of oyster shells on fine china punctuated the end of her sentence. It was an awkward, abrasive sound that perfectly mirrored the crude nature of her probing. She was digging for a reaction, searching for any indication that I had recognized the vintage pearl brooch pinned to the mistress lapel. I looked down at the white linen tablecloth. I needed to deliver a performance that would convince not only Kelly, but the two predators waiting for her report. I reached into the genuine well of grief I carried for my late father. I remembered the sterile smell of his hospital room and the devastating quiet of his funeral. The tears that welled in my eyes were real, but the narrative I attached to them was a strategic fabrication. "I am just so overwhelmed, Kelly," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. I reached up and wiped a stray tear from my cheek with a trembling finger. Kelly leaned forward, her eyes widening. The silver fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, Serena, honey," she murmured, setting the utensil down. "What is wrong? You can tell me anything. I took a shaky breath, wrapping both hands around my chilled martini glass, as if drawing physical warmth from the icy crystal. It is the estate, I confessed, letting a note of desperate exhaustion color my words. The probate lawyers, the endless asset valuations, the tax burdens. It is suffocating me. I feel like I am failing my father legacy, and the worst part is, I feel like I am pushing Nathan away. He has been trying so hard to help me, but I have been so guarded. Kelly's expression softened into a mask of maternal concern, but the subtle tightening of the muscles around her jaw betrayed her intense focus. She was absorbing every syllable, cataloging my supposed vulnerability to relay back to headquarters. Marriage is so delicate during times of grief, Kelly advised, reaching across the table to pat my hand. You have to let him in, Serena. Men want to feel useful. They want to protect you. If you shut him out, he might look for validation elsewhere. The irony of her advice was thick enough to choke on. She was subtly referencing his infidelity, blaming my emotional distance for his wandering eye, while simultaneously pretending she knew nothing about Alyssa. I know, I agreed, nodding slowly. I realize I have been making a terrible mistake, but I am going to fix it. I made a decision this afternoon. Kelly held her breath. The silence in the booth stretched tight. What kind of decision? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I am going to surrender the financial burdens I revealed, looking directly into her eager eyes. I have a primary family trust. It holds $5 million in liquid capital and diversified securities. It is the core of my inheritance. I have always managed it solely under my name, but I cannot carry the weight anymore. Next Wednesday, I am signing the authorization to transfer the entire trust into a joint holding account. I am giving Nathan direct access and full managerial control. The physical reaction across the table was instantaneous and glorious to witness. Kelly's pupils dilated. A sharp, quick intake of air flared her nostrils. She tried to suppress the triumphant gleam in her eyes, but the sheer magnitude of the monetary figure was too dazzling to conceal. $5 million. It was a sum large enough to eclipse any minor suspicion Nathan or Patricia might have harbored about my early departure from the luncheon. $5 million, Kelly repeated, her voice catching slightly in her throat. Serena, that is an incredible gesture. That is true partnership. Nathan will be so moved by your trust in him. I offered a weak, hopeful smile. I just want my husband back, Kelly. I want our marriage to survive this chapter. I am hoping this proves to him that I am fully committed to our future. You are doing the right thing, she assured me, her tone suddenly brimming with urgent, encouraging energy. She picked up her martini and took a deep, celebratory swallow. This is exactly what your marriage needs. The remainder of the dinner was a masterclass in suppressed excitement. Kelly could barely focus on her expensive seafood. She checked her watch 3 times. She nodded absent-mindedly during our superficial conversations about local real estate and upcoming charity galas. She was practically vibrating with the need to transmit the golden intelligence she had just gathered. I played the exhausted, relieved wife, resting my head against the leather booth and thanking her for her invaluable friendship. By the time we returned to the Battery estate, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the coastal sky in deep shades of indigo and bruised purple. I stepped out of her SUV and waved a gentle goodbye from the brick pathway. "Call me if you need anything, Serena," she yelled through the rolled-down window. "I am always here for you." I watched her put the heavy vehicle into gear and speed down the quiet residential street. She did not even make it to the end of the block before her brake lights flared. The SUV pulled abruptly to the curb, parking under the shadow of a sprawling oak tree. I stood on my porch, partially concealed by the climbing ivy, and watched her through the twilight. The warm glow of her phone screen illuminated the dark interior of her car. She was dialing Patricia. I turned and walked inside, locking the heavy oak door behind me. A profound, chilling calm settled over my mind. The deployment of the red herring was a definitive success. I had just fed a $5 million lie directly into the enemy communication network. When Patricia relayed the news to her son, the effect would be instantaneous. Nathan Greed would act as a blinder. Any anxiety he felt about his forged corporate loan or his risky social debut with his mistress would evaporate. He would believe his psychological manipulation had worked flawlessly. He would assume he had successfully broken the brilliant wealth manager, reducing her to a compliant asset donor. He would spend the next week salivating over the phantom trust fund, waiting eagerly for the following Wednesday. His arrogance would make him lazy. His focus would remain entirely fixed on the imaginary fortune dangling right in front of his face. He would never look up to see the actual guillotine I was building above his neck. The board was cleared. The spy had delivered the false map. My husband was pacified. I now had exactly 9 days to bypass his localized domestic threats and aim directly for the apex of his professional world. Tomorrow morning, I would not be dealing with mid-level logistics executives or gossiping socialites. I was taking my evidence straight to the top of the corporate food chain. I needed a meeting with Victor Thorne. The morning after my dinner with the spy dawned bright and unbearably humid. I sat at the kitchen island sipping black coffee and watching my husband. Nathan was practically radiating a smug, vibrant energy. He adjusted his silk tie in the hallway mirror, humming a low, cheerful tune. The deployment of the $5 million red herring had worked with terrifying efficiency. Patricia had clearly relayed the intelligence late last night, and Nathan was currently riding the high of a man who believed he had just secured his financial dynasty. He kissed my forehead, lingering just a second longer than usual, playing the role of the devoted, grateful partner. He told me to rest. He promised he would handle the remaining estate paperwork. I smiled and told him to have a wonderful day at the office. The moment his sedan disappeared down the street, my smile vanished. I walked directly to my study and picked up the phone. I did not possess the luxury of time. The corporate gala was only 9 days away. I needed to bypass the standard executive gatekeepers and secure a face-to-face audience with the apex predator of the regional supply chain empire. I needed Victor Thorne. Victor was the chief executive officer of the logistics firm. He was an old-school businessman who had built his shipping empire from a single diesel truck into a multi-state conglomerate. He valued ruthless efficiency, fierce loyalty, and above all else, pristine public optics. He despised scandal. He had spent 4 decades carefully cultivating a reputation of corporate integrity, and I was about to drop a federal fraud bomb directly onto his mahogany desk. I utilized my most guarded professional connections, calling a senior banking executive who sat on Victor's advisory board. I did not ask for a meeting. I demanded a private emergency consultation regarding a catastrophic institutional liability. 30 minutes later, I received a calendar ping. I had 20 minutes of Victor time at 1 o'clock that afternoon. The logistics headquarters was a towering structure of glass and steel situated near the industrial port. I bypassed the main reception using the private executive elevator designated by my clearance code. I wore a charcoal gray tailored suit, carrying only a sleek black leather briefcase. The top floor was silent, a stark contrast to the bustling freight coordination floors below. I walked down the long carpeted corridor until I reached a set of imposing double doors. I reached up and grasped the heavy brass knocker. The sharp, metallic thud echoed down the empty hallway, projecting authority and demanding entry. A voice commanded me to enter. I pushed the heavy door open. Victor Thorne sat behind an expansive desk overlooking the harbor. He was a man in his late 60s with silver hair and eyes like chipped flint. He did not stand when I entered. He merely evaluated me over the rim of his reading glasses. "Miss Hughes," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "My advisory board informed me you required an urgent audience." "I know who you are. Your wealth management firm handles some of the most influential portfolios in the state. I also know you are married to my vice president of operations. I assume this involves Nathan and his pending partnership transition." I walked across the room and took the leather chair opposite his desk. I did not break eye contact. "This involves Nathan," I corrected, keeping my tone razor sharp. "But it is not about his transition. It is about shielding your enterprise from a federal indictment." Victor's jaw tightened. The air in the office grew dense. I did not wait for him to process the threat. I opened my briefcase and extracted the pristine legal dossier Declan Cross had prepared the day before. I slid the thick manila folder across the polished wood of the desk. "I recommend you review page 4, I instructed. Victor picked up the folder. His eyes scanned the document. I watched his expression shift from guarded skepticism to cold, rigid fury. It took him exactly 40 seconds to comprehend the scale of the disaster. He was looking at the $2 million commercial line of credit guaranteed by my forged digital signature. He saw the name of the shell corporation, AP Coastal Holdings. More importantly, he saw the notarized seal at the bottom of the page. "Your vice president used a junior compliance officer within your own organization to rubber stamp a fraudulent loan," I explained, letting the reality settle over the room. "He bypassed retail banking protocols to avoid detection. He is using stolen funds to buy his executive equity in your company. If that transaction finalizes next week, your new partner will be a federal liability. When the bank discovers the forgery, the subsequent investigation will tear through your compliance department like a hurricane." Victor closed the folder. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He was a man accustomed to solving problems with brutal swiftness. He looked at me, his flinty eyes narrowing. "You came directly to me instead of the authorities. You bypassed the police and the banking regulators. Why?" "Because a public scandal destroys my professional reputation just as thoroughly as it destroys yours," I countered. "If I expose the forged guarantee, my clients will question my internal security. My firm will suffer. If I go to the authorities, your company becomes front-page news. We both lose." "Then what is your objective, Miss Hughes?" he demanded, leaning forward. "You hold the evidence to annihilate him. What do you want?" "I want his future," I stated, my voice dropping into a deadly calm register. "I want you to let the partnership agreement proceed exactly as planned. But we are going to alter the underlying financial architecture." Victor remained silent, listening intently as I outlined the hostile execution strategy. Nathan needed the $2 million to buy his equity shares. He was relying on the fraudulent line of credit to finance the purchase. I proposed a sophisticated financial maneuver known as a mezzanine debt buyout. Mezzanine debt bridges the gap between standard loans and equity financing. It is unsecured high-yield debt that grants the lender the right to convert the debt into an ownership or equity interest in the company if the borrower defaults. I will use my private wealth syndicate to quietly purchase that specific commercial debt instrument directly from the lending institution I explained. I have the liquid capital to clear the ledger today. My syndicate assumes the risk and buys the loan. I become his private creditor. When Nathan signs the partnership papers, he will legally bind his new executive shares as the collateral for that loan. Victor leaned back in his chair, a dark understanding dawning on his face. You become the owner of his debt. Exactly, I confirmed. And the moment the ink is dry on his promotion, I will execute a simultaneous freeze on all his domestic and hidden coastal accounts. He will immediately default on the loan parameters. Because the debt is structured with a mezzanine conversion clause, his collateral automatically reverts to the creditor. I do not just strip him of his money. I legally seize his newly minted partnership equity. You eliminate a criminal liability from your executive board without a single headline, and I walk away with a controlling interest in his shares. The silence in the grand office was absolute. Outside the window, massive cargo ships navigated the deep water channels of the harbor. Inside, a different kind of empire was changing hands. Victor Thorne looked at the pristine dossier, then looked at me. He recognized a fellow tactician. He saw a woman who did not let grief or betrayal cloud her business acumen. Nathan underestimated you, Victor finally said, his voice carrying a note of grim respect. He thought he married a pedigree. He did not realize he married a shark. We have a mutual interest in a clean surgical outcome, I replied, ignoring the compliment. Will you facilitate the internal restructuring to allow my syndicate to purchase the debt? Victor picked up his gold pen. I will have my private legal counsel draft the transfer authorizations by this evening. The partnership signing is scheduled for next Thursday morning right before the gala. We will trap him together. I stood up, retrieving my briefcase. The meeting was concluded. I had just outmaneuvered my husband on the highest corporate level imaginable. But as I walked to the elevator, a new logistical nightmare presented itself. Executing a quiet mezzanine buyout of this magnitude typically took weeks of due diligence. I had to finalize the corporate takeover, transfer the capital, and secure the legal traps in less than 7 days, all while continuing to play the fragile, trusting wife at home. That evening, I sat across the dining table from Nathan. He was pouring a glass of expensive red wine, celebrating a minor victory at work. He toasted to our future, his eyes shining with unearned confidence. He had no idea that the wine he was drinking was funded by a dead man, and that the wife smiling back at him was now his majority stakeholder. The dramatic irony was suffocating, but the real test of endurance was just beginning. The legal execution required flawless timing, and Nathan was growing increasingly arrogant. The financial architecture of a hostile debt acquisition requires a breathtaking level of precision. Over the next 48 hours, my private wealth syndicate routed the required capital through 3 separate institutional channels. We utilized blind trusts to mask the origin of the funds, bypassing any standard domestic flags that might alert Nathan or his corrupt notary. Victor Thorne kept his word. The logistics firm legal counsel fast-tracked the internal restructuring. They isolated the specific $2 million commercial line of credit Nathan had fraudulently guaranteed. By Friday morning, the mezzanine debt was primed and ready for acquisition. I sat in the secure conference room of Declan Cross downtown office. The air conditioning hummed quietly against the oppressive South Carolina heat, pressing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. A stack of dense legal contracts rested on the polished walnut table. These pages represented the total sum of my husband's professional future. I retrieved my gold fountain pen from the interior pocket of my briefcase. The metal felt heavy and cool against my skin. I unscrewed the cap. I leaned over the sprawling contract. The crisp scratch of the gold nib against the thick parchment echoed in the quiet room. Stroke by stroke, I claimed ownership of the commercial debt. I was no longer merely a grieving wife uncovering a terrible betrayal. I was a sovereign creditor holding the strings to Nathan Carter and his fragile empire. Declan witnessed the final signature. He stamped his heavy notary seal onto the parchment, finalizing the transfer. "The acquisition is complete," Declan stated, sliding the documents into a secure portfolio. "When Nathan signs his executive partnership agreement next Thursday, he will legally bind his new equity shares to this exact debt instrument. He thinks he owes the bank. He actually owes you." I drove back to the Battery estate. The coastal sun glared off the hood of my car, illuminating the sprawling oak trees lining the historic streets. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight of grief and betrayal lifted. It was replaced by a sterile, icy detachment. I walked into my home and looked at the curated furniture, the expensive rugs, the life we had built together. It all looked like a stage set, waiting to be dismantled. Friday evening arrived, draped in a suffocating humidity. I prepared a complex dinner to match the occasion: seared scallops over wild mushroom risotto. It was a dish Nathan considered highly celebratory. He walked through the front door at 6 o'clock, practically vibrating with unearned triumph. He loosened his silk tie and poured himself a generous glass of expensive bourbon before even greeting me. He took his seat at the dining room table. He did not ask about my day. He did not mention my late father or the grief he had previously weaponized against me. His mind was entirely occupied by the phantom $5 million trust fund Kelly had reported to him. He believed I was surrendering my inheritance the following Wednesday. He thought his financial dynasty was secured on all fronts. "This risotto is exceptional, Serena," he remarked, taking a careless bite. "We should have the private chef make this when we start hosting the executive board dinners at the house next month." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "We will certainly need to upgrade our hosting arrangements once your promotion is official," I replied. Nathan smiled, his ego expanding to fill the dining room. "It is going to change everything for us. The new equity tier comes with unprecedented regional control. I am finally stepping out of the operational weeds and into the true power structure. Victor knows I am the future of the firm." As he spoke, his phone vibrated on the marble tabletop. The screen illuminated. He glanced down. A slow, satisfied smirk touched the corners of his mouth. He picked up the device right in front of me and began typing a swift response. He was texting Alyssa. He was sitting at my table, eating the meal I cooked, drinking the liquor I purchased, and coordinating his new life with his mistress. The dramatic irony was a tangible entity in the room. He was celebrating an impending wealth that no longer existed. He was planning executive dinners for a partnership he would never hold. I watched his thumbs move across the digital keyboard. A week ago, the sight would have paralyzed me with heartbreak. Tonight, I felt nothing but a profound clinical fascination. I was observing a man happily constructing his own gallows. "Is work keeping you busy tonight?" I asked, keeping my tone light and conversational. Nathan set the phone face down next to his plate. "Just finalizing some logistical details for the transition. There are a lot of moving parts right now. You know how it is." "I do," I agreed, offering him a serene smile. "Transitioning assets always requires careful oversight. You have to make sure every detail is perfectly aligned." He raised his bourbon glass in a silent toast, oblivious to the lethal double meaning of my words. "You have been so understanding lately, Serena. I know the estate has been draining you, but once Wednesday comes and we consolidate the trust accounts, everything will stabilize. I promise to take all that stress off your shoulders." "I appreciate that, Nathan. I really do." The sharp chime of the front gate intercom interrupted his gloating. It was the evening courier service. I excused myself from the table and walked out to the foyer. The courier handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed gold crest of the logistics firm. I carried the envelope back into the dining room and handed it to Nathan. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and broke the wax seal. He extracted 2 heavy cardstock invitations. "The annual gala," he announced, his voice thick with anticipation. "It is next Friday night at the Grand Harbor Pavilion." He placed the invitations on the table. The calligraphy was elegant and formal. It requested the presence of Nathan Carter and guest. He ran his fingers over the gold foil lettering, treating the paper like a holy relic. "This is going to be the most critical networking event of my career. The entire executive board will be in attendance. It is the perfect venue to solidify my new standing." I looked at the thick paper. I knew exactly what he intended to do at that pavilion. According to the public relations blueprint locked inside his safe, he planned to leave me at home. He would invent a polite excuse, cite my fragile emotional state, and walk into that ballroom with Alyssa Pierce on his arm. He would introduce her to the regional directors as his supportive partner, softly launching his new social reality, before handing me extortionate divorce papers the following morning. "Will you need me to accompany you?" I asked, testing the waters. Nathan shifted in his chair, feigning a look of deep, sympathetic concern. "Honestly, Serena, I think the crowd and the noise might be too much for you right now. You have been looking so exhausted. I want you to rest. The gala is mostly boring corporate posturing anyway. I can handle the board members on my own. I might even head over a few hours early to help the coordination team set up the VIP lounges." The coordination team. Alyssa department. The lie was seamless, effortless, and cruel. "If you think it is best for me to stay home, I trust your judgment," I replied, lowering my gaze to project blind submission. "It is best for both of us," he assured me. The ticking clock had officially reached 0. The deadline was set in stone. The logistics firm annual gala was exactly 7 days away. The board was arranged. The mezzanine debt was secured in my vault. The trap was armed and hidden beneath a veneer of compliant domesticity. I cleared the dinner plates, walking back into the kitchen with a steady, deliberate stride. The next 7 days would require the greatest performance of my life. I had to let him pack his tuxedo. I had to let him drive away with his mistress. I had to let him walk into that crowded ballroom and claim his false kingdom before I burned it to the ground. The Friday of the corporate gala arrived with a thick, suffocating humidity that wrapped around the Charleston Peninsula. Inside the master suite, the air conditioning hummed a steady low note. Nathan stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting the black silk bow tie of his custom tuxedo. I sat on the edge of the plush mattress, wearing a simple, oversized cashmere sweater, holding a cup of herbal tea. I was delivering the final performance of my domestic career. He checked his reflection, turning slightly to inspect the tailored fit of the jacket. The garment cost $3,000. I paid the invoice from my private checking account 2 years ago. Tonight, he was wearing my financial support to publicly debut the woman he bought with my stolen assets. "You look very sharp, Nathan," I offered, letting my voice sound thin and fatigued. He turned, offering me a smile that was entirely devoid of genuine warmth. "Thank you, Serena." He walked over and sat on the edge of the mattress next to me, placing a heavy hand on my knee. "Are you sure you are going to be all right here by yourself tonight? I hate leaving you when you are feeling this drained." The hypocrisy was a tangible weight in the room. He did not hate leaving me. He was practically vibrating with the suppressed thrill of his impending social launch. He had spent the last hour checking his phone every 5 minutes, undoubtedly coordinating arrival logistics with Alyssa Pierce. "I will be fine," I reassured him, offering a weak nod. "I just need to rest. The estate paperwork took a lot out of me this week. You go and secure that partnership." He squeezed my knee, his ego inflating at the mention of his promotion. "I will make it a quick evening. I have to head over to the Grand Harbor Pavilion early to help the coordination department set up the VIP lounges. Victor expects the senior leadership to be visible before the board members arrive. The coordination department. It was his favorite convenient lie. "Have a wonderful time," I said, taking a slow sip of my tea. He leaned down, pressing a brief, sterile kiss to my forehead. "Get some sleep, sweetheart." I watched him grab his keys from the dresser and walk out of the bedroom. His footsteps echoed down the staircase, followed by the opening and closing of the heavy oak front door. A moment later, the engine of his sedan ignited. The crunch of tires on the oyster shell driveway faded into the distance. The moment the sound of his vehicle vanished, the fragile, exhausted wife evaporated into the chilled air of the master suite. I set the teacup down on the nightstand. I stood up, and my posture snapped into a rigid, perfect alignment. I did not weep. I did not experience a single tremor of hesitation. The time for mourning the death of my marriage had passed weeks ago. Tonight was solely reserved for the execution. I walked into my expansive dressing room and picked up my phone. I dialed the number I had secured 3 days prior. "You can come up," I instructed the person on the other end of the line. Within 2 minutes, the heavy brass knocker on my front door sounded. I walked downstairs and admitted my private styling team. I had hired a boutique agency from out of town, ensuring no local Charleston gossip could intercept my plans. A hairstylist and a makeup artist stepped into the foyer, carrying heavy black cases. They did not ask questions. They were paid an exorbitant premium for their discretion and their speed. We moved to the upper parlor. For the next hour, I sat silently in a leather chair while they worked. The transformation was not about vanity. It was about creating an impenetrable armor. My hair was swept into a sleek, structured twist that exposed the long line of my neck. The makeup was understated but undeniably sharp, featuring a bold crimson lip that projected unyielding authority. When they finished, I dismissed them with a generous gratuity. The house fell silent once more. I walked back into my dressing room to face the final physical preparation. Hanging from a velvet padded hanger in the center of the closet was a custom emerald green gown. I commissioned the dress from a private designer in New York specifically for this evening. The color was deliberate. It was the shade of old money. It featured a high architectural neckline and a dramatic sweeping silhouette that demanded attention without begging for it. The fabric moved like liquid silk. I slipped the garment on, feeling the heavy quality of the material settle against my skin. I moved toward the vintage vanity mirror nestled in the corner of the room. The silver-backed glass was an antique passed down from my grandmother. I opened a small velvet jewelry box and retrieved 2 flawless diamond stud earrings. I raised my hands, fastening the right earring. Then I picked up the left. I paused, looking at my cold reflection in the vintage vanity mirror as I fastened the remaining diamond. The woman staring back at me was a stranger to Nathan Carter. He thought he married a pedigree he could easily manipulate. He never understood that the wealth he coveted was forged by generations of ruthless, uncompromising tacticians. My phone buzzed on the vanity surface, breaking the quiet atmosphere. It was Declan Cross. I answered, placing the call on the audio speaker while I retrieved a matching emerald clutch. "The board is set, Serena," Declan announced, his voice a low, gravelly hum of professional satisfaction. "I am currently parked 2 blocks away from the Grand Harbor Pavilion. The process servers are positioned at the designated exits. They are dressed in formal attire, blending seamlessly into the event staff. They have the dissolution papers, the fraud injunctions, and the asset seizure notices ready to deploy on my command." "And Victor Thorne?" I asked, checking the contents of my clutch. "The CEO is briefed and waiting inside the grand ballroom," Declan confirmed. "Victor isolated the mezzanine debt transfer perfectly. The logistics firm legal counsel officially documented your syndicate as the primary creditor at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Nathan Executive Partnership is now legally collateralized to you. Has Nathan arrived at the venue? I inquired. Declan let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He arrived 20 minutes ago. My scouts confirmed he pulled up in his sedan. Alyssa Pierce met him at the valet stand. They walked through the front doors together. He is not even trying to hide it anymore. He feels entirely untouchable. Let him enjoy the illusion for another half hour, I instructed. I am leaving the estate now. I will see you at the pavilion, Miss Hughes. I ended the call. The final pieces of the architecture were locked into place. I walked out of the dressing room and descended the grand staircase of the Battery estate. The house felt different as I walked through the foyer. It no longer felt like a shared home tainted by a predator. It felt like a fortress I had successfully defended. I opened the front door and stepped out into the Friday night air. The suffocating heat of the day had finally broken, yielding to a cool coastal breeze blowing in from the Atlantic. A sleek, black chauffeured town car idled at the end of the brick pathway. I had arranged the private transport to ensure my arrival was as controlled and precise as my legal strategy. The driver, a stoic man in a dark suit, opened the rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather interior. The door closed, shutting out the sounds of the neighborhood. The partition between the front and rear seats was raised, granting me total privacy. "Take me to the Grand Harbor Pavilion," I requested, speaking to the driver through the intercom system. The heavy vehicle pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly over the historic cobblestone streets. I watched the gas lanterns flickering along the Battery wall, blurring into streaks of warm yellow light. The tension in the cabin was incredibly high, functioning like a quiet ticking clock counting down the final miles to the ultimate confrontation. Nathan was currently standing in a crowded ballroom holding a glass of champagne and introducing a junior coordinator as his future. He believed his meticulously crafted public relations strategy was unfolding flawlessly. He thought he had navigated the divorce, the theft, and the corporate transition with absolute impunity. He did not know that the true architect of his life was currently riding toward the venue wearing emerald silk and carrying a federal financial guillotine. The town car turned onto the main coastal highway, accelerating toward the glowing lights of the pavilion. I leaned back against the plush leather seat, closing my eyes for a brief moment. I listened to the steady hum of the tires against the pavement. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was merely ready. The wait was over, and it was time to collect my debts. The sleek black town car glided to a seamless halt in front of the Grand Harbor Pavilion. The venue was a towering architectural marvel of glass and white stone situated directly on the Charleston waterfront. The Atlantic Ocean crashed in a rhythmic, dark cadence against the seawall below, sending a faint spray of salt into the cool evening air. Corporate photographers clustered near the primary entrance, their camera flashes illuminating the arriving executives in bursts of harsh white light. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open the doors of luxury vehicles. It was a scene of manufactured prestige. I did not step onto the illuminated red carpet. Declan Cross had anticipated the media presence and arranged a tactical alternative. My driver bypassed the main thoroughfare, entirely navigating the heavy vehicle toward a discreet side entrance, typically reserved for private event staff and high-tier VIPs. I stepped out of the leather interior and the coastal breeze caught the heavy emerald silk of my custom gown. The fabric moved around my legs with a quiet, expensive rustle. A lone security guard stood by the secondary doors. He glanced at the digital tablet in his hand, noted my name on the restricted access list, and pulled the heavy brass handle open without speaking a single word. I crossed the threshold, leaving the humid night behind, and stepped into the chilled, pristine air of the pavilion. The grand ballroom was a spectacular display of corporate wealth. Vaulted ceilings stretched 3 stories high, dripping with massive crystal chandeliers that fractured the light into a million glittering prisms. A 5-piece jazz ensemble occupied a raised stage in the far corner, playing a smooth, upbeat tempo that anchored the ambient noise of the party. Waitstaff in pristine white coats circulated through the sea of tailored tuxedos and sequined evening gowns, carrying silver trays loaded with flutes of vintage champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. I did not stride into the center of the room. I possessed the patience of a predator. I remained in the architectural shadows near the towering mahogany double doors. The dim lighting of the periphery shielded my presence. I stood perfectly still, letting my eyes adjust to the brilliant glare of the chandeliers, and began scanning the vast ecosystem of the logistics firm. It took me less than a minute to locate my target. Nathan Carter was standing near the center of the ballroom, positioned strategically beneath the largest chandelier. He was holding court. He radiated a buoyant, unearned confidence, laughing loudly at a joke made by a senior logistics director. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquor in one hand, using his free hand to gesture broadly as he spoke. He looked like a man who had already conquered the world. Standing immediately to his right, holding on to his tailored arm, was Alyssa Pierce. She wore a metallic silver evening gown that caught the light with her every movement. Her blonde hair was swept up into a complex, elegant twist, mirroring the styles worn by the wives of the executive board members. And there, pinned securely to the deep neckline of her silver dress, was my great-grandmother vintage pearl brooch. The antique gold gleamed under the chandelier, mocking me from across the room. Alyssa smiled at the men surrounding Nathan, sipping her champagne with the practiced ease of a woman who believed she had permanently secured her seat at the highest table. Hovering just behind Nathan's right shoulder was my mother-in-law. Patricia Carter stood in a circle of millionaires holding her own glass of champagne and beaming with unrestrained pride. Patricia grew up clipping grocery coupons in a modest suburban neighborhood before marrying into a middle management lifestyle. She spent her entire adult life clawing her way toward the upper echelons of Southern society. She always resented the effortless nature of my inherited wealth. She despised the fact that she could never control or impress me. But tonight, looking at Alyssa, Patricia had finally found her perfect understudy. She had helped install a pliable, eager replacement. Patricia tilted her chin, nodding encouragingly as her son paraded his mistress in front of the regional directors. She was basking in the glow of his impending promotion, happily validating the destruction of my marriage to secure her own social elevation. The audacity of the scene was a physical force. It pressed against the walls of the ballroom, demanding attention. A new group of elite regional executives approached Nathan's circle. These were the men who controlled the national shipping routes, the key voters who would formally ratify his partnership elevation the following morning. Nathan straightened his posture, sensing the critical importance of the interaction. He handed his empty tumbler to a passing waiter and pulled Alyssa closer to his side. He raised his voice, ensuring his words carried over the ambient chatter and the smooth notes of the jazz band. He intended to execute the public relations strategy he had locked in his mahogany safe. He was initiating the soft launch of his new life. "Gentlemen," Nathan announced, projecting his voice with practiced theatricality, "I want to formally introduce you to someone very special. We have a lot of exciting transitions happening this quarter, and she has been the foundation of my success." The regional directors smiled politely, extending their hands in greeting. "This is Alyssa Nathan," continued his chest swelling with profound delusion. "The woman behind the man. My real wife." The words hung in the air, suspended by the sheer gravity of their deception. Alyssa smirked, playing her part with sickening perfection. She offered a demure nod, reaching out to shake hands with the executives, while the stolen pearl brooch caught the light. Patricia nodded her approval, A proud maternal smile plastered across her face. They were standing on the summit of their false mountain, claiming a kingdom built entirely on forged signatures and embezzled funds. I remained in the shadows by the mahogany doors, observing the betrayal with icy detachment. I did not need to shout. I did not need to cause a scene. The truth has a unique way of announcing itself. Standing roughly 10 feet away from my position near the edge of the shadow was a junior accounts manager. He was a young man who had visited my wealth management firm several times to deliver corporate tax documents. He knew my face. He knew my name. He knew exactly who the true Mrs. Carter was. The junior manager heard Nathan's grand declaration. He turned his head to look at the woman standing next to his vice president. Then he turned around and his eyes locked directly onto me, standing silently by the entrance in my emerald gown. All the color instantly drained from the young man's face. He looked as if he had just witnessed a ghost materialize in the center of the pavilion. He nudged the woman standing next to him, a mid-level human resources director. He whispered, frantically pointing a trembling finger toward the shadows. The director turned her head. Her jaw dropped. A ripple of recognition began to spread through the lower-level employees stationed near the perimeter of the room. They looked from Nathan, raising his glass in a celebratory toast, to me, standing motionless in the dark. The sheer horror of the situation washed over them. They recognized the catastrophic train wreck unfolding in real time, but they lacked the corporate authority to intervene. No one dared to speak. No one dared to approach Nathan and warn him that his actual wife was watching him introduce his mistress. The silence of the terrified employees acted as an accelerant, spreading a thick, palpable tension through the back half of the ballroom. The shift in the atmospheric pressure was undeniable. The ambient chatter near the entrance died away, replaced by frantic whispering and wide, terrified stares. The sudden lack of noise created a vacuum. On the raised stage, the leader of the jazz ensemble sensed the bizarre, freezing shift in the room energy. He glanced out over his brass saxophone, noting the frozen, horrified expressions of the guests near the double doors. The musician faltered. His fingers slipped on the keys. A sharp, discordant note echoed from the instrument, followed by a sudden, jarring hush as the rest of the band dropped their tempo in confusion. The sudden hush of the live music acted as a cinematic cue. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. At the far end of the pavilion, a set of heavy velvet curtains parted. Victor Thorne emerged at the top of the sweeping marble staircase. The chief executive officer stood looking down at his empire. He wore a severe black tuxedo, his silver hair catching the chandelier light. He surveyed the floor, taking in the frozen band, the whispering employees, and the oblivious vice president holding court in the center of the room. Victor's gaze cut through the crowd. He bypassed the wealthy investors. He bypassed Patricia Beaming's smile. He bypassed Nathan and his stolen future. The CEO looked across the vast expanse of the marble floor and locked eyes directly with me, standing in the shadows. The trap was fully armed. The waiting was over. Victor began his slow, deliberate descent down the marble staircase, and the final execution commenced. Victor Thorne moved down the sweeping marble staircase with the heavy, measured tread of a reigning monarch. The hushed, panicked whispers of the terrified employees acted as an invisible herald, announcing a profound shift in the atmospheric pressure of the pavilion. The crowd naturally parted before him. Wealthy investors and regional directors stepped aside, yielding the polished floor to the chief executive. Nathan remained entirely oblivious to the terror radiating from the perimeter of the room. He saw his boss descending and interpreted the movement as a personal validation. This was the exact moment he had meticulously engineered in his stolen public relations binder. He straightened his tailored jacket, puffing out his chest with unearned pride. He gripped Alyssa by the elbow, pulling her forward into the newly cleared space in the center of the ballroom. Alyssa adjusted her posture, tilting her chin upward to project maximum confidence. Her silver dress shimmered. The stolen pearl brooch rested directly over her heart. Victor approached the center of the gathering. Nathan took a confident step forward, extending his right hand to greet the silver-haired magnate. Victor Nathan called out, his voice booming with forced joviality. "I would like you to officially meet—" Victor did not break his stride. He did not extend his hand. He did not even turn his head to acknowledge his vice president of operations. The chief executive walked right past Nathan, treating him with the exact same level of attention one might give a piece of misplaced furniture. The sheer disrespect was so profound, so physically jarring, that Nathan's extended hand remained suspended in the empty space. The confident words died in his throat. Victor continued his unwavering path toward the mahogany double doors. The sea of tailored tuxedos and sequined gowns parted entirely, clearing a direct line of sight between the center of the room and the darkened entrance. Every eye in the pavilion followed the trajectory of the chief executive. I stepped out of the architectural shadows, moving into the brilliant glare of the crystal chandeliers. The heavy emerald silk of my custom gown caught the light, projecting an aura of uncompromising authority. My crimson lipstick stood out against my pale skin. My posture remained flawlessly rigid. I did not look like a fragile, grieving wife suffering from cognitive decline. I looked like an apex predator who had finally cornered her prey. Victor reached my position. He halted, stopping precisely 2 feet away. He reached out and gently took my right hand. He bowed his head slightly, pressing a polite old-world kiss to my knuckles. It was a gesture of profound respect, a visual confirmation of parity between 2 sovereign powers. He turned to face the sprawling assembly. The ballroom was paralyzed. The jazz band remained frozen. The waitstaff stood like statues holding their silver trays. The only audible sound was the rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic waves against the seawall outside the glass walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor announced, his deep, gravelly voice projecting effortlessly across the vast expanse of the pavilion. "We have an unexpected but incredibly vital addition to our gathering tonight. I am so glad the true Mrs. Carter could make it." The emphasis on the word "true" hit the room like a physical shockwave. Hundreds of gazes instantly snapped from me back to Alyssa, standing in the center of the floor in her silver dress. The junior coordinator suddenly looked remarkably small. The arrogant smirk fell from her face, replaced by a mask of raw, exposed panic. She shrank back instinctively, trying to distance herself from the man she had proudly claimed only moments before. Victor did not allow the crowd to recover. He raised his voice, delivering the final, fatal blow to the illusion my husband had so carefully constructed. And more importantly, Victor proclaimed, sweeping his hand toward me, "I would like to formally introduce our new majority debt holder and my new partner, Ms. Serena Hughes." The room turned to ice. The revelation did not merely expose an illicit affair. It dismantled a corporate hierarchy. The regional directors who had just shaken hands with Alyssa recoiled. They stepped away from Nathan, treating him like a toxic entity. The wealthy investors murmured among themselves, calculating the catastrophic implications of a vice president whose wife had just hostilely acquired his debt. I focused my gaze entirely on Nathan. All the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, chalky gray. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His brain misfired, unable to process the sheer impossibility of the moment. He had spent months manipulating me. He had weaponized my grief. He had stolen my inheritance, forged my signature, and brought his mistress to a premier networking event. He firmly believed I was sitting at home in a cashmere sweater, crying over a non-existent trust fund. He stared at me, standing shoulder to shoulder with his supreme boss. His tailored jacket suddenly looked 2 sizes too large. His chest heaved, drawing shallow, frantic breaths. A visible, glistening bead of cold sweat formed on his right temple, tracking slowly down the side of his face, reflecting the harsh light of the chandelier above him. From the periphery of the executive circle, a sharp, audible gasp pierced the silence. Patricia Carter brought a trembling hand to her mouth. Her earlier maternal pride evaporated. The realization of her own vulnerability struck her. She had aided and abetted a fool. She had actively conspired against a woman who possessed the capacity to buy and sell the entire logistics firm before breakfast. Patricia locked eyes with me. I offered her a slow, terrifyingly calm tilt of my head, acknowledging her complicity without speaking a single syllable. Patricia physically stumbled backward, bracing herself against a cocktail table to keep from collapsing. I released Victor's hand and took 3 deliberate steps forward, moving toward the center of the marble floor. The crowd parted further, giving me an exceptionally wide berth. The click of my heels echoed loudly in the quiet room. The situational conflict reached a dizzying peak. Nathan had spent weeks actively gaslighting me, attempting to convince me that my reality was fractured. He tried to make me believe I was weak, confused, and entirely dependent on his goodwill. Now he was forced to reconcile that fictional narrative with the undeniable objective power standing right in front of him. I was not a victim of early onset memory loss. I was the sovereign creditor holding the leash to his entire professional existence. Serena Nathan finally choked out his vocal cords, straining to produce the sound. His voice was incredibly thin, stripped of all its former buoyant arrogance. How did you... He could not formulate a coherent sentence. His mind shattered against the bedrock of my execution. He looked at Victor, seeking some kind of salvation, some explanation that would reverse the nightmare. Victor merely stared back, with eyes like chipped flint, offering 0 quarter. Nathan looked back at me, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked spasms. The arrogant mastermind was gone, replaced entirely by a terrified subordinate, realizing he had just walked willingly into a financial slaughterhouse. I stopped walking, allowing a pristine, flawless smile to curve my crimson lips. I looked directly into his panicked eyes, letting him feel the full, crushing weight of my presence. "Good evening, Nathan." Victor Thorne did not require a microphone to command the attention of the room. His presence carried the weight of a seasoned titan stepping onto a battlefield. He turned his attention from me to the pale, shivering man standing a few feet away. Nathan Carter Victor stated, his tone devoid of any lingering warmth. "Effective immediately, your pending executive partnership is formally revoked. Your employment at this firm is terminated." The frantic murmurs in the crowd ceased. The silence became profound and heavy. Victor continued, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You have engaged in severe corporate fraud, utilizing unauthorized assets and forged guarantors to finance your equity buy-in. This organization does not tolerate criminal liability within its ranks." On cue, 2 broad-shouldered security contractors stepped out from the architectural shadows near the mahogany doors. They wore matching dark suits and moved with synchronized purpose, stopping just behind Nathan. Nathan looked like a man waking up inside a nightmare. His eyes darted from the security personnel to Victor and finally settled on me. The arrogance that had fueled him for the past 2 years evaporated into the chilled air. He took a hesitant step forward, holding his hands up in a placating, desperate gesture. "Serena, please," he begged, his voice cracking halfway through my name. He lowered his volume, hoping to contain the humiliation to our immediate circle. "We can discuss this," Just you and me. Do not do this in public. Have some dignity. I looked at the man I had spent a decade building a life with. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I felt the precise surgical clarity of an auditor closing a corrupted ledger. You are the one who brought your real wife to a corporate networking event, Nathan, I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the polished marble floor. I am merely matching your transparency. Behind him, Alyssa Pierce finally processed the totality of her ruin. The glamorous illusion she had wrapped herself in dissolved in a matter of seconds. The realization that she was tethered to a disgraced, unemployed criminal short-circuited her nervous system. Her hand went limp. The sharp, crystalline shatter of Alyssa dropping her champagne flute onto the marble floor echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. The vintage liquor pooled around her silver heels, mixing with glittering shards of expensive glass. From the edge of the paralyzed crowd, Patricia Carter broke rank. She rushed forward, her face twisted into a mask of frantic maternal desperation. She positioned herself between her son and the security guards playing the role of the distressed elder stateswoman attempting to salvage her bloodline. There is a terrible misunderstanding here, Patricia pleaded, addressing Victor Thorne before turning her desperate gaze to me. Serena, you are unwell. The grief over your father has confused you. We do not know anything about any fraud. Nathan is a good man. You are tearing your own family apart over a delusion. She reached out, attempting to grasp my arm. I took a deliberate step back, denying her the physical contact. Patricia had always relied on the polite constraints of Southern society to shield her manipulations. She assumed I would retreat to avoid making a scene. She did not understand that I was the one directing the performance tonight. You have never cared about my health, Patricia, I stated, keeping my tone even and cold. You only cared about my inheritance. I walked past my mother-in-law, ignoring her theatrical gasp. I stepped directly into the personal space of Alyssa Pierce. The junior coordinator froze her eyes wide with undisguised terror. She looked like a trapped animal bracing for a physical strike. I did not raise my hand. I simply reached out and grasped the vintage pearl brooch pinned to the neckline of her silver gown. Alyssa held her breath as I unfastened the securing pin. I pulled the heirloom free from the fabric. I held the antique gold up under the brilliant glare of the crystal chandelier so every executive in the immediate vicinity could witness the item. This is an exquisite piece, I announced, turning the jewelry over in my palm. Late 19th century craftsmanship. It belonged to my great-grandmother. I looked directly at Patricia. My family sends their regards. You admired this specific piece in my private dressing room for an entire decade before you helped your son pin it to the chest of his mistress. I flipped the intricate locking clasp outward, exposing the hidden underside of the gold setting to the room. Initials, S-E-H. Serena Evelyn Hughes. Patricia opened her mouth, but no sound materialized. The fabricated defense she had prepared died in her throat. The physical evidence of her complicity was undeniable. The wealthy investors standing nearby shook their heads in profound disgust, stepping even further away from the disgraced matriarch. She was instantly socially exiled, stripped of the prestige she had spent her whole life cultivating. Alyssa found her voice, her self-preservation instincts kicking into high gear. She took a step away from Nathan, holding her hands up to distance herself from the wreckage. I did not know it was stolen, she stammered, her voice pitching high and frantic. He told me he bought it from an estate sale. I have nothing to do with his business accounts or his corporate fraud. I am just an employee. I turned my focus back to the shivering woman in the silver dress. The ease with which she abandoned her supposed partner was remarkable, but expected. Thieves possess very little loyalty when the authorities arrive. You are not just an employee, Alyssa, I corrected, citing the forensic data I had memorized over countless sleepless nights. You are the co-owner of a luxury beachfront condominium on Hilton Head Island. The property was purchased by a shell corporation named AP Coastal Holdings, the exact entity that received $150,000 in illicit wire transfers from my domestic accounts. Alyssa face drained of whatever color had remained. Her jaw trembled. She looked frantically around the room, searching for an exit. Furthermore, I continued ensuring the regional directors heard every single syllable. That same Shell Corporation is the listed beneficiary of the $2 million commercial line of credit guaranteed by my forged digital signature. You are not an innocent bystander. You are the registered holding company. The facade was entirely dismantled. There were no more lies to spin, no more gaslighting tactics to deploy. The objective truth stood in the center of the ballroom, pristine and indestructible. Victor Thorne offered a subtle, definitive nod to the security personnel. The two broad-shouldered guards stepped forward. They flanked Nathan, taking a firm, professional grip on his tailored arms. A third guard materialized from the corridor, guiding Alyssa by the elbow. "Wait!" Nathan choked out, digging his heels into the polished marble. "Victor, please! We can restructure the debt. I can fix this!" "You no longer work here, Mr. Carter," Victor replied, turning his back on the ruined vice president. "Escort them off the premises." They were not directed toward the grand glass entrance where the media photographers waited. That exit was reserved for honored guests. The security guards marched Nathan and Alyssa across the ballroom, heading toward the concealed doors of the service elevator. It was a route used by caterers and waste disposal teams. I stood in my emerald gown and watched the man I had married shuffle toward the industrial exit. His shoulders were slumped. His bespoke tuxedo looked rumpled and pathetic. Alyssa walked beside him, her silver dress dragging across the floor, her head bowed in deep humiliation. The heavy metal doors of the service elevator slid open, swallowing them both into the sterile, fluorescent light of the utility shaft. The doors closed, sealing their departure with a definitive, metallic thud. The grand pavilion remained draped in a stunned, breathless silence. The corporate elite of Charleston had just witnessed a surgical financial execution. I took a slow, cleansing breath, inhaling the cool air of the coastal evening. The suffocating weight I had carried for weeks evaporated into the vaulted ceiling. I turned away from the service corridor and faced the raised stage in the corner of the room. A waiter stood frozen nearby, holding a silver tray loaded with untouched crystal glasses. I reached out and selected a fresh flute of sparkling water. I looked up at the jazz band leader holding his brass saxophone in suspended animation. I offered him a polite, reassuring smile. "You may resume playing," I instructed softly. The musician blinked, breaking his trance. He brought the instrument to his lips. A smooth, upbeat melody flowed outward, filling the vast space with music once more. The waitstaff began to circulate. The regional directors slowly resumed their conversations, their tones hushed and reverent. The party came back to life, orbiting around a brand new center of gravity. The aftermath of a demolition is rarely glamorous. It does not occur under the glittering light of crystal chandeliers or the smooth tempo of a jazz ensemble. It happens under the sterile, buzzing hum of fluorescent lights in a windowless mediation room. 3 weeks after the Grand Harbor Pavilion Gala, I sat across from the man I once called my husband. The mahogany conference table separating us felt as wide as a canyon. Nathan Carter was a shell. The buoyant, arrogant vice president had been entirely erased. He wore a gray, off-the-rack suit that hung loosely on his depleted frame. Dark purple shadows bruised the delicate skin beneath his eyes. His hands rested on the table, trembling with a continuous nervous energy. He was entirely alone. Alyssa Pierce abandoned him the moment the corporate security escorted them out the service elevator. The realization that Nathan possessed zero executive equity and carried severe federal fraud exposure severed their romantic bond instantaneously. She packed her bags and fled the state, leaving no forwarding address. The illusion of their profound connection shattered upon contact with actual consequence. Patricia Carter faced a different kind of exile. The high society matrons of Charleston operate on a currency of flawless reputation. When the details of her complicity regarding my stolen heirloom circulated through the country club networks, she became a pariah overnight. Her weekly tennis matches were canceled. Her charity board seats were quietly reassigned. She retreated into her suburban home, pulling the curtains closed to hide from the silent judgment of her neighbors. She chose a thief over a daughter, and she reaped the isolation she sowed. Declan Cross sat to my right, arranging a mountain of legal documents with the precise, rhythmic efficiency of a casino dealer. The paperwork represented the final, meticulous dismantling of Nathan Carter. "We are ready to finalize the dissolution and the asset recovery protocol," Declan announced, his voice flat and authoritative. Nathan flinched at the sound of the attorney speaking. He stared blankly at the thick stacks of paper. He lacked his own legal counsel. The high-powered defense lawyers he initially contacted requested exorbitant retainer fees he could no longer afford. His accounts were frozen. His employment was terminated. He was functioning on fumes and sheer terror. Declan slid the first folder across the polished wood. "This details the seizure of the Hilton Head coastal property. The poetic justice of the real estate maneuver was my finest architectural achievement. By utilizing the mezzanine debt conversion clause, my wealth syndicate seized the physical condominium to satisfy the defaulted commercial loan. The beachfront property now belonged to me. However, the true brilliance of the legal trap lay within the structural liability. Declan drafted the recovery, ensuring the crushing tax burdens, the early withdrawal penalties, and the remaining commercial loan interest stayed explicitly tethered to the borrowing entity, AP Coastal Holdings. "You took the condo," Nathan whispered, his voice dry and hollow. "We reclaimed a fraudulently acquired asset," Declan corrected smoothly. "But the corporate entity you formed with Ms. Pierce retains the associated financial liabilities. The state tax board and the federal revenue agencies will be seeking restitution from both of you for the capital gains and the fraudulent commercial filings. You owe taxes on an asset you no longer possess." Nathan closed his eyes. A ragged sigh escaped his chest. The sheer mathematical horror of his situation pressed down on his shoulders. He was bankrupt, unemployable, and actively facing inquiries from federal banking regulators regarding the forged electronic signatures. He opened his eyes and looked at me. The bravado, the gaslighting, the cruel psychological manipulation were all gone. He looked like a drowning man begging for a life preserver from the very person he had tried to push overboard. "Serena," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his despair. "Please, I am losing everything. The firm is preparing to hand their internal investigation over to the district attorney. If you testify about the forged guarantee, I will go to federal prison." I sat back in my leather chair, studying his face. I searched for a singular trace of the man who had held my hand during my father's funeral. I searched for the man who used to brew my morning coffee. Neither of those men existed. They were merely costumes worn by a predator to gain access to my vault. "You did not worry about my future when you looted my joint accounts," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and cool. "You did not worry about my mental health when you used my father's dementia to trick me. You planned to hand me extortionate divorce papers the morning after you debuted your mistress. You built this cage, Nathan. I simply locked the door. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and burying his face in his hands. A low, pathetic sob echoed in the sterile room. I did not feel a single tremor of sympathy. I felt the profound, clean satisfaction of a balanced equation. "I am so sorry," he wept, his shoulders shaking. "I never meant for it to go this far. Can you not find it in your heart to grant me some mercy?" I reached across the table and picked up my gold fountain pen. I removed the cap, setting it aside with a soft click. "Trust is a ledger, Nathan," I stated, my voice cutting through his weeping with crystalline clarity. "And your account is overdrawn." I pulled the final divorce decree toward me. I pressed the gold nib to the signature line. The crisp scratch of the pen filled the room, a beautiful resonant sound, signaling my total emancipation. I signed my name with flourishing, elegant strokes. There were no tears. There was no hesitation. I slid the document back to Declan. The execution was complete. I stood up, smoothing the tailored fabric of my charcoal suit. I did not offer Nathan a final goodbye. I turned and walked out of the mediation room, leaving him to weep over the ruins of his own creation. Stepping out of the downtown legal building, the coastal South Carolina sunlight washed over me. The humid air felt different today. It no longer felt oppressive or suffocating. It felt vibrant. It felt alive. I walked to my car, unburdened by the heavy, dead weight of a parasitic marriage. Weeks drifted by, bringing the subtle seasonal shift of the Low Country. The brutal summer heat softened, giving way to the gentle, golden afternoons of early autumn. I sat on the wraparound porch of my historic Battery home. The expansive marshland stretched out before me, painted in shades of deep green and gold. The tide was rolling in, bringing the distinct earthy smell of pluff mud and clean salt air. It was the scent of resilience. It was the scent of home. A crystal glass of sweet tea rested on the wicker table beside me. The ice clinked softly, creating a peaceful rhythm in the quiet afternoon. The federal authorities officially indicted Nathan Carter on multiple counts of commercial fraud and identity theft. The ensuing trial would likely result in a lengthy prison sentence. Alyssa Pierce filed for bankruptcy, attempting to outrun the crushing tax liabilities of her failed coastal venture. She was currently working a minimum wage retail job in a different state, her high society aspirations permanently extinguished. Patricia sold her suburban home, downsized to a modest apartment, and faded into deep obscurity. My wealth management firm thrived. The quiet acquisition of the logistics debt elevated my professional standing to new, unprecedented heights. Clients respected the woman who navigated a treacherous corporate crisis with flawless surgical precision. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. I looked down at the wooden chessboard resting on the table. My father antique pieces stood in their starting positions, waiting for a new game to begin. I thought about the years I spent believing partnership meant carrying someone else's burdens. I thought about the vulnerability of grief and the dangerous illusion of blind trust. I survived the betrayal because I refused to remain a passive victim. I did not merely endure the storm. I studied the wind, measured the pressure, and redirected the hurricane back onto the people who summoned it. I am not a survivor. I am an architect. I redesigned my life, stripping away the rotting foundation to build something infinitely stronger. If you are currently sitting in the dark, wondering how to outsmart someone who mistakes your quiet patience for weakness, remember this. True power never has to shout. It calculates. It gathers evidence. It waits for the exact, perfect moment to flip the board. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in my position. Have you ever had to rewrite the ending someone else planned for you? Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned to Emily Told Stories. Your blueprint for reclaiming your life is just beginning. Let us keep building. The aftermath of a demolition is rarely glamorous. It does not occur under the glittering light of crystal chandeliers or the smooth tempo of a jazz ensemble. It happens under the sterile, buzzing hum of fluorescent lights in a windowless mediation room. The walls of the room were painted an institutional beige, designed to offer no comfort. The ticking of the wall clock marked each passing second with a harsh, mechanical rhythm. 3 weeks after the corporate gala, I sat across from the man I once called my husband. The mahogany conference table separating us felt as wide as a canyon. Nathan Carter was a shell. The buoyant vice president had been erased. He wore a gray, off-the-rack suit that hung loosely on his depleted frame. Dark purple shadows bruised the delicate skin beneath his eyes. His hands rested on the table, trembling with a continuous nervous energy. He was entirely alone. Alyssa Pierce abandoned him the moment the corporate security escorted them out the service elevator. The realization that Nathan possessed zero executive equity and carried severe federal fraud exposure severed their romantic bond instantaneously. She packed her bags and fled the state, leaving no forwarding address. The illusion of their profound connection shattered upon contact with actual consequence. Patricia Carter faced a different kind of exile. The high society matrons of Charleston operate on a currency of flawless reputation. When the details of her complicity regarding my stolen heirlooms circulated through the country club networks, she became a pariah overnight. Her weekly tennis matches were canceled. Her charity board seats were quietly reassigned. She retreated into her suburban home, pulling the curtains closed to hide from the silent judgment of her neighbors. She chose a thief over a daughter, and she reaped the isolation she sowed. Declan Cross sat to my right, arranging a stack of legal documents with the precise rhythmic efficiency of a casino dealer. The paperwork represented the final, meticulous dismantling of Nathan Carter. "We are ready to finalize the dissolution and the asset recovery protocol," Declan announced, his voice flat and authoritative. Nathan flinched at the sound of the attorney speaking. He stared blankly at the thick stacks of paper. He lacked his own legal counsel. The high-powered defense lawyers he initially contacted requested exorbitant retainer fees he could no longer afford. His accounts were frozen. His employment was terminated. He was functioning on fumes and sheer terror. Declan slid the first folder across the polished wood. "This details the seizure of the Hilton Head coastal property. The poetic justice of the real estate maneuver was my finest architectural achievement. By utilizing the mezzanine debt conversion clause, my wealth syndicate seized the physical condominium to satisfy the defaulted commercial loan. The beachfront property now belonged to me. However, the true brilliance of the legal trap lay within the structural liability. Declan drafted the recovery, ensuring the crushing tax burdens, the early withdrawal penalties, and the remaining commercial loan interest stayed explicitly tethered to the borrowing entity, AP Coastal Holdings. "You took the condo," Nathan whispered, his voice dry and hollow. "We reclaimed a fraudulently acquired asset," Declan corrected smoothly. "But the corporate entity you formed with Ms. Pierce retains the associated financial liabilities. The state tax board and the federal revenue agencies will be seeking restitution from both of you for the capital gains and the fraudulent commercial filings. You owe taxes on an asset you no longer possess." Nathan closed his eyes. A ragged sigh escaped his chest. The sheer mathematical horror of his situation pressed down on his shoulders. He was bankrupt, unemployable, and actively facing inquiries from federal banking regulators regarding the forged electronic signatures. He opened his eyes and looked at me. The bravado, the gaslighting, the cruel psychological manipulation were all gone. He looked like a drowning man begging for a life preserver from the very person he had tried to push overboard. "Serena," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his despair. "Please, I am losing everything. The firm is preparing to hand their internal investigation over to the district attorney. If you testify about the forged guarantee, I will go to federal prison." I sat back in my leather chair, studying his face. I searched for a singular trace of the man who had held my hand during my father's funeral. I searched for the man who used to brew my morning coffee. Neither of those men existed. They were merely costumes worn by a predator to gain access to my vault. "You did not worry about my future when you looted my joint accounts," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and cool. "You did not worry about my mental health when you used my father dementia to trick me. You planned to hand me extortionate divorce papers the morning after you debuted your mistress. You built this cage, Nathan. I simply locked the door." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and burying his face in his hands. A low, pathetic sob echoed in the sterile room. I did not feel a single tremor of sympathy. I felt the profound, clean satisfaction of a balanced equation. "I am so sorry," he wept, his shoulders shaking. "I never meant for it to go this far. Can you not find it in your heart to grant me some mercy?" I reached across the table and picked up my gold fountain pen. I removed the cap, setting it aside with a soft click. "Trust is a ledger," Nathan, I stated, my voice cutting through his weeping with crystalline clarity. "And your account is overdrawn." I pulled the final divorce decree toward me. I pressed the gold nib to the signature line. The crisp scratch of the pen filled the room, a beautiful, resonant sound, signaling my total emancipation. I signed my name with flourishing, elegant strokes. There were no tears. There was no hesitation. I slid the document back to Declan. The execution was complete. I stood up, smoothing the tailored fabric of my charcoal suit. I did not offer Nathan a final goodbye. I turned and walked out of the mediation room, leaving him to weep over the ruins of his own creation. Stepping out of the downtown legal building, the coastal South Carolina sunlight washed over me. The humid air felt different today. It no longer felt oppressive or suffocating. It felt vibrant. It felt alive. I walked to my car, unburdened by the heavy, dead weight of a parasitic marriage. Weeks drifted by, bringing the subtle seasonal shift of the Low Country. The brutal summer heat softened, giving way to the gentle, golden afternoons of early autumn. The antique mahogany desk inside my study no longer felt like a war room. It was simply a place where I managed legitimate, honest wealth. I sat on the wraparound porch of my historic Battery home. The expansive marshlands stretched out before me, painted in shades of deep green and gold. The tide was rolling in, bringing the distinct earthy smell of pluff mud and clean salt air. It was the scent of resilience. It was the scent of home. A crystal glass of sweet tea rested on the wicker table beside me. The cool condensation on my glass matched the refreshing chill of the incoming ocean breeze. The ice clinked softly, creating a peaceful rhythm in the quiet afternoon. The federal authorities officially indicted Nathan Carter on multiple counts of commercial fraud and identity theft. The ensuing trial would likely result in a lengthy prison sentence. Alyssa Pierce filed for bankruptcy, attempting to outrun the crushing tax liabilities of her failed coastal venture. She was currently working a minimum wage retail job in a different state, her high society aspirations permanently extinguished. Patricia sold her suburban home, downsized to a modest apartment, and faded into deep obscurity. My wealth management firm thrived. The quiet acquisition of the logistics debt elevated my professional standing to new, unprecedented heights. Clients respected the woman who navigated a treacherous corporate crisis with flawless surgical precision. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. I looked down at the wooden chessboard resting on the table. My father's antique pieces stood in their starting positions, waiting for a new game to begin. I thought about the years I spent believing partnership meant carrying someone else's burdens. I thought about the vulnerability of grief and the dangerous illusion of blind trust. I survived the betrayal because I refused to remain a passive victim. I did not merely endure the storm. I studied the wind, measured the pressure, and redirected the hurricane back onto the people who summoned it. I am not a survivor. I am an architect. I redesigned my life, stripping away the rotting foundation to build something infinitely stronger. If you are currently sitting in the dark, wondering how to outsmart someone who mistakes your quiet patience for weakness, remember this. True power never has to shout. It calculates. It gathers evidence. It waits for the exact perfect moment to flip the board. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in my position. Have you ever had to rewrite the ending someone else planned for you? Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned to Emily Told Stories. Your blueprint for reclaiming your life is just beginning. Let us keep building.